What's up, everyone? Welcome to Normal America Show. I will be debating Pisco tonight. Let me start recording this. Tonight, I will be debating Pisco is a left-wing lawyer with moderator Destiny, who's a left-wing streamer, on whether or not someone should have been charged for deleting subpoenaed evidence in the Hillary Clinton investigation. I will be arguing that they should have been. Pisco will be arguing that they shouldn't have. It should be an interesting debate. There's been a lot of back and forth that led to this conversation that we're having. I'm not going to talk about that in this stream. Talk about it in other streams. I talked about it in my Twitch stream. This will be streamed not to Twitch because Destiny, the moderator, is banned on Twitch. So I'm going to see if they are ready to go. Let's see if I have Destiny's. So I do believe Destiny's streaming right now with someone else, so we might have to wait for a moment to get on. Hope everyone's having a good time. Now there's a chance what I'm gonna do is post a link to Destiny's stream of this because I just want to let you know because I'm at
being rhetorically in
because I'm at work. I'm off the clock, but because I'm at work, my internet sucks here sometimes. So because of that, you may want to. I might have to stop streaming and just record it and put it up later. Because of that... Oops. Oh, come on. Oh, my chat's not loading, so... Whatever, you could look up Destiny's... Yeah, I can't type in my chat. I don't know why. If someone has the link, could they put it up? It won't let me post in my chat, so. Alright, great stuff. So, apparently, Pisco says, just wait, he's talking to someone else. Fine, great. What can you do? So, I'll stop recording this now, let it know. So, how's everyone doing? I have an interesting weekend coming up. The comfy.stream that I'll be streaming to is my new sort of base. Their big opening is Saturday. They're having a 24-hour stream. I should hop on there a little, but unfortunately I have a wedding that day. So rehearsal dinner Friday, wedding Saturday, family reunion Sunday. So I got a big weekend planned, but that's okay. I would not have started streaming this early had I known. By the way, you can say a lot about me, but I'm pretty punctual usually when I'm doing these debates. It seems that usually it's the lefties that are always late, so I was ready. But so if you're just tuning in, we're waiting. I'm doing great, Achilles. We're waiting for Pisco and Destiny to bring me in. Am I giving up on Odyssey? The live stream service sucks. You have to use a different live stream key like every time. It doesn't save your videos. If I have to choose between Comfy, a platform that is ran by someone I know that's going to give me a much larger percentage of the donations, that's got tech people that'll be helping me. Yeah, it buffers a lot. There's a lot of problems with the Odyssey live stream. Now, their regular service is okay, but and I'll still be posting regular videos, I think, to Odyssey, but the live streams are a bit much. And I've reached out to people like Lauren Southern that was like kind of an ambassador for Odyssey on some tech questions, and no one ever wanted to help me out, so it is what it is. So let me mute the desktop audio here and see if he's ready to go. What's up, Aftershock? Great to see you. Yeah. So, the impetus of this debate, I talked about it on my other stream there, but the impetus of this debate became, I think that a lot of left-wingers are bad faith. Most of the ones that are on this platform that I debate and things like that. And the reason is because they have no problem with double standards in our institutions as long as the double standards seem to be benefiting their side at that point. Now, you could say on a specific issue or something like, well, it's different, there's nuance, etc. But when there becomes a pattern where it's every single time, you could start to see that people aren't really interested. There's certain things that people could say that just, to me, are beyond the pale. For example, when I was debating I'm Really Important on Merrick Garland's memo, basically using the FBI to target parents at school board meetings, and I said, listen, if Donald Trump had used his attorney general, say Bill Barr, and he would have came out, and let's say the NRA would have wrote a letter to Bill Barr saying, we think you should use the Patriot Act to treat the people that criticize us like terrorists. Go after them as domestic terrorists. And Bill Barr would have came out and said, we got that letter, and because of that letter, we are going to use the FBI to look at groups that are critical of the NRA. The left would have flipped shit, and I'm Really Important would have flipped out. He said, no, I wouldn't have. And I was like, you're a liar, you're bad faith. And he is. He is. How hard is it to just be like, well, yeah, that would be terrible, but I don't think that's what happened here, and here's why. But no, he's just like, no, I wouldn't. And we know he would. We know he would. So I have no problem calling that out. Similarly, with Pisco, we've gone 17, 18 hours. Every single situation, it doesn't matter. It'll always come down to, well, there's discretion from law enforcement, and he happens to every single time say, yep, the discretion to go after Trump people as hard as possible and Hillary people as light as possible, or the other people as light as possible. Every single time that happens to be the right decision. Straight down to, you could protest outside Kavanaugh's house, even though the letter of the law and legal experts said, yeah, that's clearly illegal. He's like, well, we don't know. There's questions into the constitutionality of that law. Do you think Pisco's talking about questions of the constitutionality of the National Records Archive laws and whether or not Trump's allowed to keep those or not? You think he's talking about that? Or if he could have declassified? No, he's not saying that. He's saying, absolutely, raid the house. Is that fun? Now, does that mean I think Pisco's the worst person in the world? No. Does that mean if Pisco tells me, like, I like chocolate chip ice cream, that I think he's lying? No. But when it comes to these topics, I don't know if it's intentional. I suspect it is. But if it's not intentional, he's so hyper-partisan, it makes the conversation irrelevant 90% of the time. So the reason I chose to take this debate, I won't give it away. I'll tell you afterwards, because I'm sure some people from Pisco's Discord are here. But he wanted to debate me on if what we're hearing in the media about the affidavit's true. Did Trump break the law? And the problem is, this is the control of the narrative that people on the left always want to set up. I was talking about this right before I started this stream. It's like when you look at... Remember when Tim Pool was on Joe Rogan's show with Vija and Jack Dorsey? Right? And Tim Pool would be like, this conservative got banned. And they'd say, well, technically, the terms of service, they violated the terms of service. And Tim Pool would be like, yeah, but what about these three lefties that did the same thing but worse? Why didn't they get banned? And they'd be like, well, We'll have to look into that. We don't catch all of it. And it's the same with the, failing to register as a foreign lobbyist. Hey, sorry, Manafort, that's the law. Okay, what about Hunter Biden? He did that. What about the Podesta Group? They did that. What about Mercury LLC? They did that. Well, sometimes they choose not. Lying to the FBI. That's okay. What about Mills and Aberdeen? What about Hillary? Well, mishandling classified information. That's against law. What about Hillary's team? Well, deleting subpoenaed evidence. That's obstruction of justice and a bunch of other crimes. What about Hillary's team did it? Well, it's every single time. The debate's supposed to start at 9:30, but clearly it's not because the monitor. Pisco said we'll be ready to go soon. So, one last time I'll repeat this. It won't let me. Can someone, Aftershock or someone, can someone look up Destiny's live stream right now and put a link to that in chat? It won't let me. Last time I tried to do one of these streams at my work office here, the internet sucks so bad that my live stream kept lagging. If that occurs, what I'm going to do is record this and I'll upload it later. But I'll shut down the live stream and you all could go to Destiny's channel and watch the live stream. Yeah, I know Destiny doesn't want to debate me. I get it. I know why, too. I don't think it'll be terrible, but I suspect Destiny will involve himself in this debate. I don't think it'll be terrible, but it'll be a little 2-on-1-ish. When I saw Zen Shapiro debate Jangles, I think, with Destiny as a moderator, Destiny kept chiming in. Which is fine. I'll call him out for it. I don't care. Yeah, I saw Destiny had Mr. Girl on there. Mr. Girl, some of my least enjoyable types of people to debate are people. He's got a lot of the Joe Lewis thing where people want to sound more intellectual than they actually are. Right? You could do it. You could be a sophist and just argue a meta point and semantics on every single point, which is what Mr. Girl wants to do, because he thinks that it makes him sound smart. It doesn't. Do I think that the FBI raid was illegal? 95% chance. I don't know. Illegal would be the term. It's bias. Our FBI needs to be immediately disbanded. It is beyond redemption. It interferes worse than Russia or any other country could. My prediction is I already got several concessions from... anyways, the reason I took this debate was because I'm not leaving them control the terms. And so instead of focusing on, yeah, Josh, I guess watch the debate, man. Or Jose, or I can't read your name. My vision's poor. That is true, Aftershock, isn't it? Resist. Why not? Don't make me bring back transpositive Rob. Who knows if this will ever start? The Mr. Girl drama continues. Might as well grab another water. I'll probably need at least 2. if you want to do something fun, and if you want to approach this like I am, I'll just drop this little hint. Ask yourself how many of the arguments Pisco makes in this debate tonight would then apply to Donald Trump. It's pronounced Sway? Okay, cool. Josway. Okay, gotcha. But I am going to try to be affable, and I'll try not to just call Pisco bad faith the entire debate. If that's my summary at the end of it, then I'll say so. But for the purpose of getting through this debate, we'll stick to the merits of it. And I'm sure Pisco's prepared with his friends quite a lot to get ready for this debate. My preparing was doing my DDP yoga, working all day. Let good faith prevail. Talk to Pisco. Again, I apologize for the lateness of this. If my stream starts lagging, please go to Destiny stream. I'll upload this somewhere later. The topic that Pisco specifically wrote out, whether the DOJ should have prosecuted Hillary Clinton or senior aides or Paul Combetta for the destruction of subpoenaed materials. You know, good faith isn't always there, Josue. It's not. Good faith isn't there for people that you know are lying to you. People that say, violence is the language of the unheard, and not mostly peaceful for left-wing riot after riot after riot after riot, and then when there's a right-wing riot, say this is an insurrection, this is the worst thing ever. That's not good faith. People that said kids in cages were a human rights abuse under Trump, but under Biden it's like, well, 4 times more, oh well. Hey, what's up, Jeff? How you doing, man? Well, that's the question I have. If they've convinced themselves of the lie, is it then not bad faith? I don't know. It means the same thing to me. I again apologize for this. Let me see if they're ready to go. Let the record state I was on time. This doesn't seem like it's ready to go. It didn't have to be Destiny moderating, by the way. I could have picked, but I wanted to give Pisco the opportunity. I had a feeling he would pick Destiny, because I got a feeling him and Destiny don't want to debate me, and so this could kind of be a proxy. That's what my feeling is. Yeah, and that's the problem, Akili. It's like, this is what people don't understand. Like, I'm not, like, you want someone who's more hardline than me. Look at my friend Aftershock here, right? And he's probably right, I'm in this weird position where I got a bunch of left-wing friends. I'm a pretty likable person. I'm pretty easygoing. I'm forceful in my opinions and my ability to debate, but I'm pretty likable, pretty easygoing. But what I see is a lack of almost any populist, conservative, etc., pushing back and going on offense against almost all of our institutions and millions of people that support them and their double standards and their corruption. And so we're constantly like, well, they're arguing in good faith. Well, they're like, yeah, we'll weaponize the FBI to go after you and say, oh, prosecutorial discretion. If you take classified evidence home, we raid your house. If our people take it back, well, no big deal. And then Republicans are like, well, okay. No one ever stands up and goes, no, you're full of shit. And so that's what I do. My preferred moderator is always the Crucible, I think. No, I wanted a moderator because every time Pisco and I talk without a moderator, it's 5 hours. So I wanted a moderator. But if it was me, I would have chosen Andrew or Pedro at the Crucible. I think they're the best moderators. But they mentioned modern day debates. That's fine. I would have did it there. I told the people in Pisco's Discord they could have moderated. I don't give a shit. It's wrapping up. Let me check here. All right. I think we're about to get going here. Let me see. Pisco. Join the general lobby. Got it. Great. Yeah. Now I'm in a lobby with a bunch of Destiny folk. Oh! Alright, last time I'll say it. Go to Destiny stream if my stream craps out. I'll record this. I'll upload it later. I'm going to try to live stream, but my internet here at work sucks. So, we'll have fun with this. We'll have fun watching Pisco go, oh, the IG said it was okay. Oh, of course I got it. Is there any doubt? Yeah, being a country boy, it sucks, right? Am I still in the general? Boom, 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 boom. Wipe it with a cloth. What? I don't know about trying to be their friend. I'll be myself. I am who I am. That's all I could be. I go by my feels. I mean, last time I talked nicely to Pisco, and that didn't end up so well for him, did he? You also have to remember, I'm talking to thousands of people in Destiny's audience. If I sound too much like a dick, then they won't hear my argument, which is obviously going to be correct. Well, thank you, Jeff. I could be friendly and forceful at the same time, I feel. Ugh. God, I hate when you are supposed to do one of these. We're 22 minutes late. Come on. I have a life. I could be watching Seinfeld right now. Or doing other important things. Oh, yeah, Aftershock. You're right, yeah. Yeah, I know they won't listen to me. See? You disagree with me, but you still love me. Let's see if we... Did I get moved? Good. Just give me 1 second if you guys don't mind. All right. You guys are going to lose me visually.
He still wanted to talk afterwards that my unwillingness to, or my usage of it as a joke was still bad. I actually don't know. It's one of the few arguments where I don't actually know if I can, I don't know if I could actually rephrase the argument to a other person. It's very, I have to think about it a lot. I'm not sure. I got super lost like at 7 different points of that conversation.
I don't know anything about that guy, but isn't he the guy that sings songs? Yeah, I don't know anything about that guy, but isn't he the guy that sings songs about like sleeping with children? You would think he wouldn't have a problem with jokes, joking about the term Nazi and stuff, Just saying.
Well, but his issue is that I actually can't even say. I'm sorry, I don't know.
I heard a little of it as I was waiting. It's I don't know.
The issue is that he's not he's not actually a pedophile, and he's not trying to use his position to gain political power to become like a fascist pedophile ruler or whatever. Whereas Nick is in his mind an actual Nazi, but not in my mind. So I don't know why that matters. But he's worried that Nick is actually seeking real political power, and that I'm bolstering his platform and helping him to do so. Like if Mr. Girl was an actual pedophile, he would have the same arguments, but he's not, so he doesn't.
If people would put 1/10 of the energy into focusing on who they hang out with their own life instead of demanding that streamers only hang out with the people they want, we'd probably be in a far better position.
Maybe, or maybe not. I mean, there's some response. It's complicated arguments. Okay, I don't want to. If he's not here to represent his arguments, I don't want to like shit on.
Fair.
It's not. Okay.
So Rob, how do you want to do this? I think it might make sense to you have like openings and then just get right into it. Is that cool?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So we're going way back, chat. We're going back to 2014, 15, and 16, discussing the Hillary email scandal again. But a particular sort of subset of it. I'm going to assume that you guys know most of the facts of it, but just sort of a brief rundown I think will be helpful. For all of Hillary Clinton's tenure as Secretary of State from 2009 to 2013, she used a private email server for both official work and private work. And this sort of came out in the Benghazi hearings after the attack on our embassy or consulate in Benghazi. And from that, there was a big kerfuffle in Washington where this was discovered by the State Department and by the House of Representatives. In 2014, Hillary Clinton handed over a bunch of emails, roughly 30,000 emails that her lawyers had deemed to be work-related or official-related to the State Department. But they withheld around 30,000 emails, which the lawyers considered to be personal or not having to do with official work. In 2015, in March of 2015, the House of Representatives issued a subpoena for all communications, including those that were on the server, and they wanted to see every single communication related to what was going on. And it happened to be the case that after the subpoena was issued, those emails were deleted from the server. Our entire discussion right now is about whether or not Hillary Clinton, her lawyers and aides, and the person who actually did the deleting, employee of Platte River Networks called Paul Combetta, should be charged with the deletion of the subpoenaed evidence. That's it. We're not talking about classified information. We're not talking about the Russian investigation. We're not talking about FISA warrants or substantive discussion about that. We're just determining criminal liability with respect to the deletion of subpoenaed evidence. And basically, I think that Rob has the burden of proof here. And I'm going to ask him three things. Who should be charged? What they should be charged with, i.e. what crime did they commit? And what is the evidence for having committed those crimes? And I think that he has the burden of proof to show beyond a reasonable doubt that the elements of whatever crime that he's picking are sort of met out for Hillary Clinton, her aides / lawyers, or for Paul Combetta. My position is that they should not have been prosecuted, but I think first and foremost, Rob has the affirmative obligation to, before he starts talking about double standards or talking about how bad faith I am, to show that there is sufficient evidence for prosecution here. So just remember, the narrow focus of the conversation is the deletion of subpoenaed evidence. And with that, I'll give it to Rob.
Yeah, I'll just talk about how we got into this conversation, then that's fine. The reason we got into this conversation is because what I see happen all the time is people that are in favor of these institutions that have showed double standards constantly selectively looking at situations when they think that those institutions are going after people they don't like and saying, see, these are technically crimes. These are things, right? Trump had, even if it wasn't classified evidence, he had national records at his home, and that's technically a crime under this statute, and therefore they should raid his home. But they were silent when similar crimes or the same crimes or worse crimes are committed by other people. And we could see that double standard by the FBI, no raid of anyone connected to Hillary, which we could talk about a little exactly what happened with Combetta, Mills, etc. in the IG report that shows, they had laptops where they had called all of these emails, and instead of, even though the FBI desperately wanted to get their hands on them, they never issued a raid. They never issued a subpoena for those. Instead, they proffered immunity deals to get those. They deal with these things constantly in a double standard. My issue has always been that a double standard at the world's most powerful law enforcement agency and intel agency of the FBI is far more troubling than any specific crime that Hillary Clinton was alleged to have committed, that Donald Trump was alleged to have committed, that Joe Biden, etc., etc. The ability for these institutions and these bureaucrats to influence our elections in our country by using double standards, whether it be intentional or unintentional, but it is intentional because we can see evidence of their bias, is more damaging than any of those specific candidates or presidents or politicians, because the politicians come and go. The bureaucracy stays. And so that's what my focus has been. It's been that same focus since about 2018 when I started streaming on YouTube back then before they tried to kick me off. And it continues to be my main focus now. On this issue specifically, we get into this conversation because I feel that Pisco every single time will always defend any FBI action that goes against Trump. He will obfuscate, he'll be silent, he'll later say, okay, that was bad, but what can we do about it now, etc. He'll make excuses for these double standards over and over again. And so I think that it's important to go through one of these situations, in this case, an obvious crime that was committed, the deletion of subpoenaed evidence, which is an obvious crime, and the fact that the FBI allowed that to occur and chose not to charge anyone. And we could see how the FBI treats people connected to Trump. I don't think they would have been that generous, nor do I think that Pisco would be upset if they would not be that generous going after Trump people for this. So on this issue specifically, I forget the specific three questions that Pisco asked. He could re-ask them if he wants, but I'll say this. Pisco's already conceded basically the answer to all of those questions. He'll try to resort to legalese and say, well, the actual text of this specific law says XYZ. He's already conceded, and I'll ask him at the top, that deleting subpoenaed evidence, if you were aware that there was a subpoena, is a crime. That crime should have been prosecuted. We can't tell. So to answer the specific point of who should have been prosecuted, Paul Combetta, the tech guy who deleted the subpoenaed evidence 2 weeks after it was subpoenaed, absolutely should have been prosecuted. Should other people? We don't know. It's hard to say, because had they prosecuted him and then turned the screws on him, perhaps he would have told a more honest story than, I had an oh shit moment, because even though I knew that there was a subpoena, I remember 6 months ago I promised to delete this stuff and didn't. It is an unbelievable story, and the fact that someone who is a lawyer like Pisco continues to believe this story, or more importantly, that Comey and the FBI believe this story, proves their bad faith and proves how corrupt the entire thing was.
Wait, before we get into this, could I ask a couple clarifying questions?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So, without getting too particular, I've had run-ins with the FBI because people have reported me for things. And I've been told different things in regards to quote unquote tampering with evidence. So I'm asking a legal question. I will say, Rob, you have to be really careful not to say things like legalese, because we're talking about legal processes. So the legalese is going to be not just a big part of it, it will be everything. Perhaps the only thing. The legal part is incredibly important when we're talking about a legal process. But now my question is if you destroy evidence after a subpoena has been issued, is that like a statutory offense, or do you have to prove intent there?
Great question. The answer is, for almost every single crime in Title 18 or in the federal code, or any crime ever, criminal intent is assumed. Even if it doesn't say knowing or willful, the baseline assumption for all crimes, unless it says otherwise, is that criminal intent is required. You have exceptions like for nuclear, disposal of nuclear stuff or dynamite blowing up. Those are places where we might put strict liability offenses. In other words, you don't need to prove any intent whatsoever. But they are few and far between. Just for reference, that presumption is so strong. That's why the FBI, and we're not talking about classified information, but in the gross negligence statute where Hillary Clinton, where there was an argument about her classification, whether or not, her culpability, they interpreted gross negligence to be almost like the manslaughter laws, where it's sort of approaching willful intent. So it's a very strong presumption. And in the statutes where I think Rob has the obligation of saying which statutes, which criminal laws he would point to, they actually all do have intent, anyone that would have applied to this conduct. And so that leads us into the first question, which is...
Sorry. So then just
I would like to answer that as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, go
if
for
you
it.
don't mind. I'll be real quick.
That's fine. Yeah,
the reason that it doesn't...
I'm only moderating. I'm not here to take
Yeah.
a side, so I'm just asking. I was curious. Yeah, go ahead.
The reason that it doesn't matter in this case is because you have to understand that this debate came about as a result of a conversation that Pisco and I were having. And one of the things that I think is so frustrating for debating Pisco is he constantly...
Hold on, wait. I got to cut in real quick. I'm so sorry. We need to focus on the material of the debate, not why it came about or what happened. The debate is whether or not Hillary Clinton's team or Hillary Clinton, somebody on her team, should have been prosecuted by the FBI. I don't care how the debate came about, right?
Nonetheless, if let's say you're debating a lawyer, Destiny, right? And the lawyer's like, here's the exact law, here, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, okay, I don't have that up in front of me, but do you think they broke the law? And they're like, yeah. Well, does it matter then? Pisco's already admitted to me that this was a law that was broken. He's already admitted it.
No.
So it doesn't matter. Yeah, you have. I could bring up the text if you want.
So before, a question was posed about one of the actors in this discussion, that is Paul Combetta. This is the person who actually deleted the subpoenaed evidence. There's no question that a deletion of subpoenaed evidence occurred. There's no question that it occurred after the subpoena issued. There's actually no question that he was aware of the subpoena. So all that stuff is laid out.
Okay.
But the question, as always, is criminal intent, which is one of the elements of these statutes. And if you read the Investigator General report on it, that's where the evidence is sketchy, and also where the principles of prosecution related to who the target is matter. But this is sort of, we're getting ahead of ourselves. The first question we have to ask is a primary question. Who do you want to charge, Rob? Who do you want to prosecute, and for what?
I already answered. So I would prosecute Combetta. Let me ask. I would prosecute Combetta, and I would prosecute him for deleting...
You wouldn't prosecute Hillary Clinton, and you wouldn't prosecute any of the three lawyers. That's Cheryl Mills, Heather Samuelson, and David Kendall. You wouldn't prosecute them for this crime.
The question becomes murkier as you go up. Now, there's still, right, there are other statutes, which I don't have the statute in front of me right now. I could dig it up, but I know you have it. It was on your evidence list there. There are statutes that say, for example, that you can't delete public records, right? Records that are the property of the government. And so the fact that Cheryl Mills, even after there was an agreement to hand over these records, decided in December of 2014 to order that all of these records previous to 60 days be deleted could in its own right be a crime. But if you give me a second to elaborate here, I actually don't even give a shit, right, about this level of it. At the end of the day, I think that there's probably a lot of people that have classified stuff at home, And the original charge of should Hillary be charged for having classified records at home, I don't really care that she wasn't charged. To me, it was the brazen deletion of subpoenaed evidence that was the blatant thing that should be charged. So when I'm talking about, well, could Mills technically have been charged for ordering government property be deleted? Yeah, maybe, but that's not really the interest I have here. So what we could definitively
We're not talking about
prove,
that, right?
Right. So when you ask me who should be charged, should it be Mills, should it be them? I'm saying we don't know because we had to buy Paul Combetta's obvious lie that he acted on his own. So what we know at the bare minimum is that Paul Combetta should have been charged, and the fact that he wasn't by the FBI shows, once more in a process of other things, the double standard they were engaged in.
On the points about deletion of government records, which is not the point that we're here to argue about, just so you know, that also has a knowledge requirement, and
and also let's get away from that because we all agree we don't care about that. Your first question, I think, has been answered, Pisco. So let's try to narrow because it can sprawl. It can sprawl to so many. We don't care about deletion of government records, right?
I understand. I'm pointing out we're also not talking about the classified information stuff. So we're only talking about the deletion of subpoenaed evidence. Yeah. And Rob, you said that it's very obvious that Paul Combetta should be charged. We'll get there.
Okay.
But
that's the answer to question one. Then he wants to charge Paul Combetta with something, right?
But hang on, I want clarification on the other two. Based on what we know now, it was correct not to charge Hillary Clinton for deletion of subpoenaed evidence, and it was correct not to charge any of the three lawyers, Mills, Samuelson, and Kendall.
You're asking me? Or you're telling me?
Yes, I'm asking you.
Okay.
I'm asking you.
There is no evidence that I've seen that the FBI has shown that showed that Hillary Clinton ordered someone to delete subpoenaed evidence.
If there's no evidence, they shouldn't be charged, right?
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Okay. Now, that evidence most likely exists. Paul Combetta most likely did not act on his own. But when you give someone immunity and then say, well, what do you have to say about this? And they say, yeah, I did it all on my own. I had an oh shit moment. Yeah, it's clear to see. It's not an excuse, right? But I could say right now, I can't provide you evidence that Hillary Clinton should be charged with deleting subpoenaed evidence. I suspect that she was knowledgeable of it, but I can't prove it. That's why it was so terrible that unlike with the Trump investigation, where they decided to go after low-level people, charge them with crimes, and try to get them to flip, in the Hillary investigation, it was the exact opposite. Give everyone immunity and then say, did you do it? And they say, yeah, we did it on our own. Surprise.
Okay, so, but clear on the facts before us, it wasn't at most, when we'll get into the use of immunity later on, but at most you would fault them on the procedural steps taken in finding out about Combetta's testimony, not the non-charging decision based on what information is available to the FBI.
I have no idea what you meant by that question. I will tell you what I'm specifically talking about, which is the fact that they did not charge Paul Combetta, who knew there was a subpoena for these emails and still chose to delete them.
Assume good faith in the investigatory methods of the FBI just for a moment. And they really did believe that this was the best way to get information from Paul Combetta. The charging decisions of Clinton and her lawyers is not a problem, right?
Again, I don't understand what you... Like, I'm saying right now, based on what they did, they probably didn't have evidence to charge Mills or Hillary with destruction of subpoenaed evidence because they probably don't have that evidence.
What should Combetta have been charged with?
Deleting subpoenaed evidence.
Okay, there's... I listed a bunch of statutes in our... And I'm not going to expect you to... So I'm not going to be here like pick the statute, whatever. I'm going to give you some of the statutes here, and you tell and the flavor of them at least, and you tell me which one you think makes sense. So one statute is that he could have been charged with is obstruction of Congress, right? This I think 2 USC 192. That's what's being used to charge Steve Bannon. That's was used to charge people who lie to Congress sometimes. Or obstruct Congress in other ways, although there's a specific line statute as well under Title 18. It's the maximum penalty is a year. Does that sound like that would apply?
It could possibly apply. It's not the one that I had looked at. That I will tell you, the reason I can't get these is because if I bring up almost anything here at work, my internet will crap out. So I had this written down, but... Yeah. That's not the one I was specifically looking at, but I guess if I read the text of that statute, that could be one.
The reason I bring that up is because that is I would say, the statute that has the least mens rea requirement in terms of intent. The statutes related to obstruction of justice, the ones in Title 18, the ones that might apply to a grand jury subpoena, those all have a requirement that, those are felonies. Those are felonies that are chargeable up to 20 years, and some for 10 years. Those are felony offenses, and as what's required in those statutes is not just an intention to delete subpoenaed evidence or delete evidence or fruits, things that Congress or an official government agency is looking for. You have to do so corruptly. So it's an intent, and it's a corrupt intent, an intent to delete evidence that's being subpoenaed and to do it for a bad purpose. The obstruction of Congress statute, on the other hand, that's like a misdemeanor. It's like the maximum penalty is a year, and there isn't this requirement of corrupt intent in that statute. And that's the one that's typically charged for a lot of these things. But to charge them with the lower offense, you have to certify it with the House. 2 U.S.C. 194 is the statute, your companion statute to 2 U.S.C. 192, obstruction of Congress. Why do you think, Steve Bannon was put before the House and the Speaker of the House certified it? Because they have to charge him under that statute.
The obstruction. Can you link the statute for obstruction of justice, the second one, the felony? What is the statute? Can you read it?
There's potentially 4.
Okay.
There's 18 U.S.C. section 1505, obstructions of proceedings before departments, agencies, and committees. Whoever corruptly or by threats of force or by any threatening letter or communication influences, obstructs, or impedes, or endeavors to influence, obstruct, or impede the due and proper administration of the law under which any pending proceeding is being had before any department or agency of the United States, or the due and proper exercise of the power of inquiry under which any inquiry or investigation is being had by either House or any committee of either House or any joint committee of the Congress, shall be fined in prison not more than 5 years. That's the felony. That's the first felony, right? 1505, corrupt intent required. 1510, a similar thing, right? You need to show corruption. You need to show, I actually don't know if 1510 would apply because you need a criminal investigator. 1512 deletion under, this is 18 U.S.C. 1512. Under subsection C, whoever corruptly alters, destroys, mutilates, or conceals a record, document, or other object, or attempts to do so with the intent to impair the object's integrity or availability for use in an official proceeding. That's the statute. Again, an obstruction statute that deals with corrupt intent. Those barriers of evidence are high. You have to show not just knowing and intentional conduct, but corrupt conduct. And so my argument would be, show me the evidence of Paul Combetta's corrupt intent. Because we know that he did the thing, right? He deleted the evidence. Correct? Right. We agree on that. So show me the evidence of Paul Combetta. Because we agree, right? You're not mad at that. Are you mad at the House Republicans for not certifying obstruction of Congress crime to the U.S. Attorney?
I would say that I don't understand exactly how the process goes that it would need to go through Congress. I know that deleting, if any other situation occurred, if anyone in Trump's orbit intentionally would delete evidence that was subpoenaed a couple weeks after the subpoena, that you and the FBI would say that's absolutely a crime, charge them. You wouldn't say, well, they intended to destroy that evidence, but we don't know that their intent was corrupt. It is clear that Paul Combetta's intent was corrupt. It is clear.
All right, so let's talk about it then.
Okay, so go ahead. Let me ask you a question.
I apologize.
So you think that? Let me just ask you: is it a crime to delete subpoenaed evidence?
It can be, with corrupt intent.
Okay. So when you said just to be clear, when you said on our Discord conversation, I can read it to you if you want, right?
Yeah.
I said, "Oops, sorry." Well, damn it! Now it screwed up on my phone here.
Let me short circuit this.
You specifically.
Yeah.
You specifically.
This is. Yeah,
right.
This is before I read the statutes. This is before I read the FBI report, before I read the Inspector General's report. And so I was wrong in that moment when I said if he knew about it, he deleted it, because I didn't know that you needed to show corrupt intent. I thought you just needed to show knowing intent.
I mean, again,
the obstruction.
It is I'll just say, we won't hamper on this, but this is something that I complain oftentimes with debating you. You'll say something declaratively, and then within 4 hours, you're like, I actually completely reversed my position because now I found something. So this is something that you do quite often. But nonetheless, right?
Okay,
do you
hold
think...
on, stop. I'm moderating. Stop. If we're arguing over this particular position, that's fine. If you want to argue over whether or not Pisco is annoying because he changes a position after looking up more information, that's a totally different topic. If you want to argue whether or not somebody else would have been charged with something, that is also a different topic. If you want to argue with whether or not people would have pushed for or not been happy with charges if Hillary would have been a Republican, that's a different topic. Right now, the question is ought Hillary or anybody in her staff had been charged with a crime?
Combetta.
Now, it sounds like we're saying maybe Combetta should have been charged, but now we need to deal with the actual intricacies of our legal system. So to say somebody committed a crime, did they? Yes. It doesn't logically follow that that person ought to be charged with a crime for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons can be, in order to further an investigation, sometimes it's necessary to make deals of immunity with people to gather more information, because otherwise they would be self-incriminating and the investigation will die. So that's the next part of this question is, was it appropriate to charge Paul with a crime, or would the investigation have died or something where they have not been able to gather information otherwise? By the way, I have no background on any of this. I don't know fucking anything about any of this, so I'm just asking questions.
That's not the question that we will get to that, I'm assuming, but that's not the question that Pisco's asking right now, right? I'm just trying to outline. So do you think, let's just answer this question. Do you think that Paul Combetta knew about the subpoena?
Yes.
Okay, and your argument is you don't think 2 weeks after getting a subpoena, and you think he intentionally deleted the emails, correct?
Correct.
And he knew those emails were subpoenaed, correct?
Correct.
But you just don't think that there's proof that he did so for corrupt reasons?
Yeah, I think that evidence is weak.
So here's the question that I have to ask. Wait, so here's a question in relation to that, and then either of you can answer. Was there sufficient evidence that Paul could have been charged with a crime? And it would have gone through, and you would have gotten a conviction on that. Is that likely or unlikely?
According to the Good. The IG report says yes. The IG report says that it was that there were agents that were pretty certain. Not just this. In fact, Paul Combetta was interviewed two times before he got his immunity deal, and the FBI agents that interviewed him said both times they thought he was misleading and that he could have been charged with lying to the FBI.
That's lying. That's
What's
lying
that?
to the FBI. That's lying to the FBI.
Right. I understand. Right. And they also said that they thought there was evidence to charge them with this, but they decided instead of taking him to a grand jury, that it would have been better to proffer immunity because it would have been faster.
That's not the only reason they were given him proffered immunity. And for you to summarize it like that is, how can you look at yourself in the mirror?
Wait, okay. Well, then why did they give him immunity then, proffered immunity?
Multiple reasons. One is the determination was made by the FBI that it was questionable legal culpability and legal exposure from him. Yeah, you could have an
Can I ask about you real quick? What are you guys sourcing this out of? How do you know this?
This is so I sent you before the Inspector General's report. This is the DOJ's. They have a whole office just dedicated to internal investigations. Okay,
gotcha. Okay.
And so they interview a bunch of FBI officials. They interview people involved. They subpoena records, and they find out what was the story. And what they said was, at the time, maybe we can make an obstruction charge on him, but it's not clear, number one. Number two, by issuing a grand jury subpoena, and he was just going to plead the fifth, which after they issued the grand jury subpoena, that's what he did, and he closed up. 3, he was offering to be cooperative with them right off the get-go. So he was telling you, yeah, give me immunity. I will provide you the information that you want. And then finally, if they charge him and try to get him to, plead lower or do no time, then they were worried that deal could be used to impeach him much more credibly than a proffer, which is what ultimately he got, a proffer. And it's just, by the way, the proffer, that's not total immunity. That's not, they could still charge him after that. The proffer that he used, I think it's called Queen of the Day immunity.
That's wrong. He did not get Queen of the Day. That's incorrect. He did not get Queen of the Day immunity. That was offered to Tagliano.
He had a proffer at first, didn't he?
No, he did not get Queen. Right? So it specifically delineates that he didn't get the Queen of the Day immunity, which I'm not going to bullshit you. I don't specifically know what that is anyways, but I could read in the OIG report, it says that they didn't give him. They gave him immunity. Well, even if his letter by reading immunity. Well, let me explain. Yeah. The immunity was that he could not be charged with any incriminating crime that he gave through truthful statements. Now, they could still charge him with lying if he lied to them after they gave him the immunity, but if he said, yeah, I did it, I intentionally, for corrupt reasons, deleted subpoenaed emails, his immunity deal would have been been, okay, then we can't charge you with that. And what I'm arguing here, what Pisco is going to do is, and this is what the entire IG report did. The IG report, by the way, did the same thing in Crossfire Hurricane. If you read the outline of what Horowitz, the IG, was saying, he says, it's not my role to determine whether or not something was influenced by bias. Now, Pisco, you tell me if you disagree with any of the following. The IG definitively says that there is evidence from many high-level or multiple high-level people at the FBI showing bias against Trump and for Hillary. Would you agree that the IG found that?
In this report, yes.
Right, and in Crossfire.
Sorry. This would amount to the texts and conversation, especially with Page and Strzok.
Hold on. Okay, because now we're mentioning a territory that I know a little bit more about. When we talk about bias, was this an investigatory or like a criminal prosecutorial bias, or was this just text messages between agents?
That it put a cloud on the investigations. They weren't able to ultimately determine that it had an influence on the on anything because
so not that it put a cloud, but it put a perception at least of one. I just want to be clear here because there was a contention that the Strzok messages showed that they were acting with impropriety, but that was never.
That's not what they found, but no.
Yeah, okay. I just want to be very clear. Now, that might have been influencing some of their decisions, and they might have been being unfair because I just want to be very clear what we're establishing there. But okay, go.
Right, and that's what specifically I'm saying. So what people rely on is saying, well, the IG said that they didn't see that bias influenced these decisions. And when the IG was asked specifically about this, he says, I'm not saying bias didn't influence it. I'm saying we couldn't prove it. And how would you prove it? Unless someone specifically had an email that was like, we're giving Combetta immunity because we don't want to harm Hillary. You'll always have Pisco and people that defend him you'll always, let me finish. You always have Pisco and want to defend them say, well, we can't know the intent. We don't know the intent of these FBI people, right? And so then what the IG does is they say, is it in each individual action that occurred in both investigations, is it theoretically possible and within the codes of the FBI for them to take those actions? And the answer is almost always going to be yes, as I'll get Pisco to admit here in a minute, because there's such a thing as discretion and prosecutor discretion. So they could always, is it true that sometimes you can give people immunity? Sure, it's true. And because we don't have an email saying that anyone at the FBI said we're giving him immunity to screw over Trump, then therefore the IG is just like, okay, it's technically allowed and it happened. But what it ignores is the pattern that occurred the whole way through this. And so when we're talking specifically about Combetta, I leave the audience to be the judge of the story, which will tell if they think that it wasn't with corrupt intent, that a guy just on his own, knowing that it's a crime to delete subpoenaed evidence, knew there was a subpoena, and still deleted it. And his explanation was, I knowingly committed that crime because 5 months ago, they told me to delete this stuff, so I'm doing it now. Even though I know it's still subpoenaed. And by the way, no one told me. Even though I talked to Mills just 2 days before I deleted them, and I say I can't recall...
Real quick. You're making really, really, really good arguments that a crime has taken place. And I don't think anybody here is actually arguing against you. I don't know who you're
I'm
disputing. The question right now is whether or not somebody should have been charged with a crime in a different way. That's the question.
Well, he's speaking about evidence with respect to intent, and so I would, to side with Rob just for a second here, Dest, I do think that what he's saying is relevant because he's saying, like, what other motive could you have? Isn't it obvious that you would have a corrupt intent?
Well, but like I think what we're asking here is, was there corruption on the part of the FBI to not charge?
No. Well, first, before we can say there's a double standard, there's corruption, we need to establish that there's a there. And so Rob will definitely be able to use evidence of hypocrisy when it's ever like a discretionary type thing, which we'll get to on the discretion elements. But
couldn't we just, this is what I'm curious about, I could be wrong, but couldn't we argue that, like, yeah, he did it, yeah, the intent was there, and yeah, we can prove it, but maybe giving him immunity here lets us get farther up the ladder, and even if we know all of those things, he probably still shouldn't have been charged with a crime because we can work. Yeah,
that's the discretion part of it, which is they didn't want to go after this guy. Their target was Hillary Clinton.
Yeah,
that's on the discretion stuff. If you believe,
because if you're giving the argument that like the maximum penalty for this is like 1 year, and this guy's got like no priors or whatever, right? Like, I've watched The Wire. Do you really want to charge some dude and get him like fucking 3 months in federal prison on a delayed suspended sentence? Like, who cares? When you're trying to go further up the ladder to see, because it's probably more important to see. Because here's like the weird thing, and I obviously can't argue this. I know I'm right on this. I hate to say that, but I know I'm right. My guess is that if they would have thrown the book at that dude, we would be having a debate right now where Rob would be saying, Don't you think it was really suspicious that the
Paul guy.
FBI went after Paul and they charged this fucking guy instead of offering him a deal of immunity to climb up and see if we could have gotten somebody to roll over on Hillary Clinton? Don't you think he was the fall guy in this operation? I think we could be having that debate.
Well, let me tell you. Can I give an? So Rob has made an accusation that immunity didn't make sense in this case. I'm going to tell you why it absolutely made sense. So one is on the merits of the actual evidence. So in terms of a corrupt intent, one thing that cuts against that corrupt intent is that there is absolutely zero evidence that Paul Combetta knew what he was deleting in terms of the substance. If you had evidence that Paul Combetta was so in the classification saga, everyone agrees that Hillary Clinton had classified information on a private email server, and the only thing missing to charge Hillary Clinton was intent, right? You didn't need more evidence of classified information. What you needed was evidence of intent. And so to believe that he had a corrupt intent, one piece of evidence you could offer is that Paul Combetta knew he was deleting the significant information that proved intent for Hillary Clinton that was missing. But there's total lack of evidence that he was aware of what he was deleting in terms of the substance of the underlying emails. Another
real quick. Can I pause? Right again, this isn't a so. We have a discussion, right? You admit to something, and then we come into the discussion, and now you roll back. So let me ask you again. Have you not conceded, I'll just be point blank, did he know the emails he were deleting were the ones that were subpoenaed?
Yes.
Okay, so then what you just said is irrelevant. He knew they were subpoenaed, and because let me finish. It doesn't matter if he thinks, well, I didn't know if those emails had classified material or not. I didn't know.
It actually does matter.
It does not matter, because if he knew they were subpoenaed, you don't get... So then, this is what lawyer Pisco is telling you. If you have emails subpoenaed from you, right, and you, after that subpoena, they say, we're subpoenaing these 1,000 emails because we're investigating the crime of whether or not you ordered your friend to rob Burger King, right? And you'd say, well, it's okay to delete 900 of those, even though they were subpoenaed, because you personally don't think that speaks to whether or not this crime in Burger King happened. No, you can't delete them, period.
So all I'm saying, right? First of all, everyone agrees that you shouldn't do this as a matter of practice, because you could be found with corrupt intent. If you're trying to hide any kind of evidence that could be inculpatory for Hillary Clinton or for anyone else, or for you for that matter, that could be strong evidence of your corrupt intent. But in this particular case, right, following a directive from previously had directive, which you do not deny, was there. In terms of Cheryl Mills, I mean, you agree, don't you? Cheryl Mills, in December of 2014, told him to delete that evidence. And you agree that if he had deleted it then, it wouldn't have been a crime under the subpoena laws.
No, that's not necessarily true. There could still be crimes to deleting evidence that is government property or classified evidence.
We're not talking about that. I'm talking about before the subpoena is issued.
Are you so? The question you're asking me is, if someone deletes stuff and there's no subpoena, should they be charged with deleting subpoenaed evidence? That's the question you're asking me,
right?
Yes, Pisco. The answer to that specific question is no. If there was never a subpoena, then you can't be charged with deleting subpoenaed evidence, even if you broke other laws.
Okay,
sure.
So then
you got one victory tonight.
Given the fact that the order was given in December, given the fact that he wasn't aware of the nature of the files that he had, whether or not they were incriminating or exculpatory or anything like that, it's murky, right? It's a messy case.
No, it's not.
It's
very simple. It's very simple.
That's just on intent.
That's just it literally. And again, this shows sort of your mindset going into this. This is exactly why we're having this debate. Is that it's not murky. It's not murky at all. If this evidence, it doesn't matter if you were told 10 years ago, hey, you should get rid of that stuff in the garage. If the cops subpoena the stuff in the garage, you can't say, oh, I forgot 10 years ago, my wife told me to get rid of that stuff. I'll go take it to the dump.
You're doing a loop, Rob.
I'm not doing a loop.
The question is about corrupt intent. It's not enough. It's not enough to just knowingly delete subpoenaed evidence for some of these obstruction laws to apply. It has to be corruptly. Now, there can be tons of circumstantial evidence that goes. You don't agree with that?
I do not agree. I think that. Well, I agree that there has. Well, the second statute didn't. That talked about Congress specifically, right? But nonetheless, even if we're going,
they didn't certify it.
Okay, then they were corrupt as well. Don't care. There is no doubt that this was a crime that was committed. And even if we take your definition that we need corrupt intent, the best evidence here is that this was corrupt intent, because it is beyond the pale to think. You admit that this guy knew. This is, just so everyone knows, this is the tech guy that's in charge. It's been in charge the entire time of working with Mills and the other lawyers in the FBI's team, which we'll get to sort of his Reddit comments and things like that, in order to hand this over. Originally what happened, you can stop me if you think I'm wrong, Pisco, July 23rd, 2014, an agreement is reached between the Hillary camp, the DOJ, or the State Department, and the Benghazi committee, the Republicans that are on the committee, right? A day later, we have Paul Combetta going to Reddit and asking how to remove Hillary's email address. We'll get to that later because I think that speaks to his motivation. But what we then see is at that point, Combetta was now being tasked with going through emails, deleting ones that they didn't think were work-related or separating them, and then handing over these. So it's not like Combetta was just some random guy that was like, oh, they dropped these emails off at his tech shop, and he was like, oh, I forgot to do that job from 5 months ago. This is a guy that's communicating with them the entire time. They stalled and didn't hand this stuff over. And even after Cheryl Mills decides to delete stuff that they didn't hand everything over, so she decides in December. And then a couple months later, when the subpoena is handing down, there is no way that Combetta doesn't understand exactly what that means. And so the excuse for him to be, well, I told them that I was going to delete this, and that's my reasoning, that rationale makes zero sense. It does not make sense. Because it doesn't. He knows that it's a crime to delete this subpoenaed evidence, and it's not a defense to say, but someone told me to delete it 3 months ago. That's not a defense that makes sense.
Do you need to show corrupt intent above and beyond just, the statute could say for the obstruction-related crimes, essentially anyone who alters, destroys, mutilates, or conceals a record, document, or other object intentionally shall be fined under this title not more than 20 years. It could just say intentionally destroy. It says corruptly. That means something, and the case law just agrees with me that you have to have an additional showing, not just of intentionally deleting subpoenaed evidence, but for an improper purpose.
What is the statute? Can you link this specific statute again?
One example, right? All the obstruction ones that are possibly applicable are in Title 18 and start with 15. Okay, so one that I'm looking at right now is 18 USC 1512, and it's subsection C. That would be relevant.
So title what?
This would be Title 18 USC section 1512.
18 USC.
I can link it for you, Robbie.
Robbie? What the fuck?
Oh, my bad.
No, I don't give a shit. It's fine. So you said 15. I'm looking at
18 USC 1512, subsection C.
1512. Tampering with whoever kills or that's not going to work. Subsection C.
It starts. Yeah, whoever corruptly alters. Oh. Whoever corruptly alters. It's C1.
C1. Let me see here. Whoever corruptly alters, destroys, mutilates, or conceals a record or document or other object, or attempts to do so with the intent to impair the object's integrity or availability for use in an official proceeding.
Oh,
let me reread that. Let me reread that. Let me reread it, right? Whoever corruptly alters, destroys, mutilates, or conceals a record, document, or other object, you concede he did that, right?
Yeah.
With the intent to impair the object's integrity or availability for the use of an official proceeding. That's exactly what he did.
Yeah, he did that.
Right.
But you're missing the thing that I'm talking about, which is in big, you see little c right there? Whoever corruptly does it. And so I just want to lay out a case for you, Rob. This is the case. One, the evidence of corruption is somewhat murky because you have someone who's ostensibly, he can give at least a plausible, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest standard in the land. This guy can give an answer like, it wasn't corruptly. I thought I was just, fulfilling what it should have been the case back in the day. I wasn't trying to hide anything. I was just trying to, get it into like a status quo. That's the murkiness on intent. As well as the fact that there's no evidence of his knowledge of any incriminating evidence there. That's one case that he can make plausibly. I'm not saying that the government couldn't win that case potentially. I'm just saying it makes it murky. The other murky aspect is the factual question. He doesn't admit to deleting the evidence until the third interview after he's given the letter of immunity. And so at that time, he's been denying in the first two interviews that he deleted anything.
Lying.
And so
Right.
it's not clear until the third interview.
But again, that shows that he has a pattern of lying. So why would we trust him now, anyways, with his obvious bullshit excuse? And let me further say this:
is that enough to like establish like beyond a reasonable doubt like he's got a pattern of lying? Therefore,
well, it's Destiny. It's because the excuse that he's giving makes no sense, right? And furthermore, to go with define corruptly.
So different.
Do you want me to define it as used in section 1505? As used in section 1505, the term corruptly means acting with improper purpose, personally or by influencing another, including making a false or misleading statement or withholding, concealing, altering, or destroying a document or other information.
Yeah, that's in 1515 USC 50 where the definitions are, and courts have interpreted those. There was a case which was overturned by the fact that they passed this definition, which limited the scope of 1505. Obviously, right now we're talking about 1512, but if you want to talk about 1505, that's fine. But typically, as understood and interpreted, 1505 still requires that extra evidence of corrupt intent. It's not enough.
This would be a kill shot for either of you. I don't know if either of you have done the research for this, but like, if either of you could demonstrate a case, Pisco, if you could demonstrate a case where somebody had tried to bring these charges, but it failed in court because somebody successfully defended against it because they didn't have compelling enough evidence to show that there was that corrupt intent, then that would be pretty big.
Those exist.
Hold on, Joe. And then on Rob's side, Rob, if you could show an example where they go, well, look, this guy did it. We know that he deleted it. And he knew he had like the subpoena, and this guy still got rid of this evidence, and he didn't have a good alibi for it, and that was enough to do the conviction. I think if there was a case for either of you two there, then that would be pretty strong argumentation.
There are cases that go both ways, depending on the facts. And all I'm trying to say is this particular fact pattern, there's potentially some good facts for Combetta on the corruption element of it. I'm not saying he would win in court. I'm just saying it would be murky, and it would be made murkier by the fact of this potential factual issue. And then ultimately, the government wants to get to Hillary Clinton. That's their target. And they know that the case...
But I have to meet all these markers, right? So like Destiny's right. Destiny's making the argument that's actually a better argument for you, though it's a really bad argument, which is, okay, even if he committed the crime, can we still say that it was okay for them to give him immunity? But I have to jump through this first hurdle of you saying, well, it's not a crime because he didn't have corrupt. Now, I'm just read to you.
Murky, right?
It's not. And by the way, a brief aside, I know Destiny won't want to hear this as a moderator, but this is constantly how Pisco will operate. It's always, and by the way, not just Pisco, this is also how the FBI is going to operate constantly, because the truth is, and see if you'll agree to this, discretion in all of these things could come into every single case, right? So, for example, this case could come up again with totally different people that are unconnected to politics, but very similar situation. Just someone who works for some company. The boss of the company said, delete this stuff. He forgets to delete it. Then it gets subpoenaed. He knows it's subpoenaed, and then he deletes it saying, oh, I was supposed to delete it. You could see a case where that would be prosecuted, correct?
Wait, say that last part one
Yes,
more time.
we all could. That there's a guy who deletes stuff, he knows it. We all could see that being a case.
Yeah. Right. Which is how it would usually go, right?
We don't know that, but go ahead.
But the problem is, right, that they'll always be able to say, well, it's always up to the FBI. It's up to them to decide. Now, we could see the FBI has exhibited that they have bias. Now, I agree with what Destiny said. The IG doesn't say that bias influence these decisions, but it's almost impossible for the IG to be able to prove that. So we know that there's bias. We know that this was a case that could have been brought. We know that the excuse that was being used by him is garbage. It just is. And it meets definition of other cases that have been charged.
Here's ultimately the question, okay? So as the moderator. So firstly, you said that you kind of have a harder position, Rob. Yeah, I'm glad you should have a harder position. It's the goal of you're the one that wants to bring charges to somebody. There's it's a charge that for a conviction, you need beyond reasonable doubt to secure that conviction. I hope that's a high bar. That would be the hope, right? We all would hope that here. So, but the question is, and I agree with you that bias doesn't mean there's a text saying, I love Hillary, I'm not going to charge her. If that was the bar, nobody could prove bias ever. And that would be unfair for us, or it would be unfair for you to say that if you can't produce that, then there's no bias, right? We all agree with that. Bias could be shown at every single step of our criminal justice process. It could be done investigatorily. It could be done at some head ordering something. It could be done bureaucratically. It could be done in the court. We all agree with that, 100%. So I guess what I'm looking for is who can Pisco sell me a plausible story?
Let me sell you.
Or why well, you don't have to. You already have, right? Could you sell me a story?
Now I'm going to quote the IG report.
Oh, sure, you can quote the IG report. But right now the story on the table is just that, like, it seems like it makes sense to offer some form of immunity here, because who the fuck cares about a misdemeanor charge on a no-name when fucking Hillary Clinton
It's a felony.
could theoretically be... Who cares? Oh, felony?
We're talking about
Yes.
the obstruction charge at this point.
Oh, the obstruction, sure. Okay, maybe even a felony. But for some guy that, for all intents and purposes, nobody has any idea who the fuck this is, when it could go all the way up to somebody like Hillary Clinton, who not only will ignore even the juicy part, that's security important. Secretary of State, that's a really important thing that we might need to know information about, right? So if the story that you're selling me is that, like, maybe it's important to give this fucking dude immunity to see how much farther, like, maybe the investigation will gain legs and we can see where it goes, that story makes sense to me. And I think to show, like, bias or something horrible on the other end, I feel like I need a little bit more. Another story, but yeah, go, and then you can.
The IG report that we've been quoting this whole time agrees with me on the murkiness and the fact that it's a difficult case to prosecute. Everything I've said, right, is backed up by the agent's accounts. I'm going to quote to you from right now. According to documents we reviewed, the forensic evidence showed that Clinton's emails had been deleted and wiped from the servers, but did not definitively link Combetta with those actions. Agent 2 explained that the team felt pretty strongly that maybe he had deleted information off of Secretary Clinton's servers, but that interpreting computer forensics and precisely what they mean can be, quote, kind of messy. Similarly, the forensic agent stated that based on the forensic evidence alone, it would be very difficult to be certain that Combetta conducted the deletions. However, based on the mid-year's team's assessment of the credibility of Combetta and the other administrators, the team was more focused on Combetta. Prosecutor 2 told us that using the forensic evidence in combination with witness testimony, the team probably could have established that Combetta conducted the deletions. However, Prosecutor 2 stated that there was insufficient evidence after the first 2 interviews to prove that Combetta understood his obligation to preserve Clinton's emails and deliberately violated the Congressional Preservation Order. So at the point in which they're making the charging decision, at the point in which they're making the immunity decision, the team doesn't have the evidence we have. The team doesn't have the evidence available to it to make the determination after the fact that we know that he did the deletions. The team doesn't have that available to them. And this is their own agents and prosecutors saying it would be a murky case. Rob says he knows better.
Right, because what that's saying is that was at the time where they didn't know. Now, we do know that they did delete it, so let's just be clear to what everyone just heard. None of that is saying that the agent said that after they knew that he deleted it, that it would be murky and wasn't a crime. That's not what they're saying. So the question becomes, if you read the report, what it suggests is that they interviewed him twice and thought that he wasn't forthcoming both times. And it says that there were various reasons. One of them has to do with time, which, according to the IG report itself, time should never be a factor in something like this. So the entire scope of the FBI investigation that said we need to get finished before the election was absurd on its face. So that was one of the big reasons why they did this, because they thought to have a grand jury to subpoena evidence, to subpoena communications and things like that from Combetta, Mills, etc. would have taken a lot of time.
Can I ask a question on that? Mm-hmm. Don't you think that, isn't that actually completely and totally consistent with Comey's view on this investigation and the election? Wouldn't it be completely consistent that if I had Comey in front of me and I were to ask him, bro, what the fuck? That he would actually say, and he would mean it, he would say, listen, if we're doing an investigation that involves Hillary Clinton and there's going to be charges coming down for her deleting, like there's going to be a potential conviction for an investigation like this, that we want to get that investigation moving as quickly as possible, because bringing out that sort of conviction right after an election is going to make it's going to undermine so much of our intelligence and our judicial process. Didn't that seem pretty consistent with how Comey felt about things, or no?
Well, no. Comey waffles back and forth on it all the time. So, for example, if you read the IG report...
that agrees with me then. Then he was back and forth. He's like...
Right. So if you read the IG report, it's one of the things that excoriates Comey for, is it doesn't say it was criminal, but it says he seemed to pick and choose. For example, when it came to Weiner's laptop, he decided to sit on it. They didn't do anything for a month. And then he came out and said, we got to get it done before the election. When it came to other things, it didn't say that. You want me to read directly from it?
So
go ahead.
So the FBI sat on it, and that Comey was like kind of loosely aware of what it was. But once he found out of like the severity of it, then he jumped on it. I mean, that's
not what it said. That's not what it says whatsoever. What it says is that people at the high level.
I concede it. It's a corollary
right.
matter. I don't know it. Just go.
Okay. Anyways, so the IG says that they constantly did this. So at some points they were like, well, we have to get this finished fast. And at other points it seemed it didn't go along with that. They were doing things that seemed to draw it out longer, such as the FBI not investigating the laptop in a prompt manner. And it wasn't just Comey, obviously. Even Pisco will admit this. There were people below Comey that were making these decisions, like Strzok, who was the one who intentionally set on the laptop from Weiner, and that was only released because a whistleblower went to the Southern District in New York a month later and said they're not gonna look at this before the election. Nonetheless, the point I'm trying to make.
Just curious. Wait, I just want to hold on because I know a little bit about structure. So was Strzok the only person in the FBI that knew of that laptop, and it was his sole decision?
He was a major agent involved in this investigation,
in fact,
as well as the Russian investigation.
Sure, the whistleblower was an agent.
Sure, but I just want to make sure he wasn't like he had it and he was like hiding in a desk or something like this.
The IG kind of excoriates the FBI for sitting on it for as long as they do. They're like, it just makes no sense.
Yeah. Okay, sure. Okay.
But nonetheless, right? So it did the timing of it, like, and if you read the beginning of the IG report, it specifically says when it comes to political investigations and things like that, that none of that should influence, whether it be the timing of it or any of that, should influence the FBI's protocols in an investigation, right? So the idea that they wanted to rush this along, because there's no evidence to suggest that had they charged him with a crime, and for example, they had him for the lower level crime of lying to them, and said, okay, you lied to us.
They didn't have him for that.
Yes, they did. The agent said
you're working on the. That's their assumption. They don't have the confession. They don't have the confession until the third.
But again, so Pisco, like,
you're operating in this post.
Go ahead, please. I'm sorry. You're right.
You're operating in this post hoc world where everything is it's great. You have perfect information right now as you sit down here. I show you the report from the IG where it says it was murky. They didn't have concrete evidence to time to the thing. They didn't have concrete evidence that he was aware of the preservation order at the time he did it. They couldn't time to, like, that all gets into the decision on whether to charge or not. And it's fine for you to come after the fact and say, okay, we know he deleted. We know he was aware. That's obvious. But I'm just telling you, there's issues there. And the target is Hillary Clinton. Comey says it. The other, you listen to what they say about it. I mean, they say, I was concerned that we would end up with obstruction cases against some poor schmuck on the down that had a crappy attorney who didn't really know. Like, that's what they're. You think they're all lying about that? There's just a big scheme, like, to cover up the obvious evidence that Hillary Clinton directed it or something?
I think that the FBI was clearly biased, and they understood that charging someone that was low level would look bad for her candidacy, because even if she wasn't directly charged, if someone would have been charged in this investigation, the American people, rightfully or wrongfully, would have said, look, crimes are being charged. This is exactly the opposite tack they took with Trump. Right? When it came to investigating Trump, they did the exact opposite. They didn't say, well, we don't want to just go after some low-level guy like Papadopoulos, so let's give him immunity. They took the exact opposite tack. They said,
Flynn was a target.
Right, so everyone surrounding Trump was a target, right? But no one surrounding Hillary was a target. And so, like, it even says...
Wait, I got it. Hold on. Flynn's position in Trump's...
He was national security advisor.
I wasn't... Who said Flynn?
Hold on.
So I'm arguing against...
Papadopoulos.
Okay, Papadopoulos. Sure, maybe we can say Papadopoulos. I don't remember what his exact role was, but for somebody like Flynn, it would make more sense, of course, that he's
I
like
said
more
Flynn.
important.
He didn't say Flynn.
Okay. Right, I said Papadopoulos, who is basically comparable to Combetta in that both were very low-level people, but they went after Papadopoulos. You disagree with that?
One's a tech guy. The other guy's a foreign policy advisor.
Right, a low-level foreign policy. One was a tech guy that was literally the person that was in communications with Hillary's team.
Also, you think that anytime that people distinguish facts, they're bad faith. You know, you don't believe these agents when they're saying that it's murky. You just don't believe them.
It has nothing to do. I don't get a chance. You keep saying they say it's murky, right? Oh. What wasn't murky was the agent said that they thought he was being misleading and lying. So this is traditionally how this would go. You would say, okay, we suspect that this tech guy was the person that deleted these, but he's lying to us. He's being misleading, and so we are going to say you're being charged with lying and misleading us. Then we're going to go to a grand jury and get more subpoenas to find more evidence to find out exactly who deleted these things. And when we find out if it was you, then you're going to be charged to the full extent of that. Instead, what they decided to do. So you don't think that they would have been able, by talking to the rest of the people, like, well, who we know these? They knew they were deleted, right? They knew the emails were deleted, correct?
That's right, with Bleach Pit.
You don't think that by talking to Mills and Pagliano and the rest of them, they would have said, we gave it to Right, so they had a pretty good idea of who deleted it. And they knew that the guy they thought deleted it, even though it was murky, had lied to them. And they had enough evidence to charge them with lying. So right now they have a choice. And they even say this. They said, we have two choices. We can either go to a grand jury, indict him for the crimes that we could prove that he did, or we could offer him immunity. And the reason we're offering him immunity is, one, we don't want to just go after a low-level guy. And second, there were issues with the time frame that they were talking about. And third, they say, well, maybe he lied to us because he had a shitty lawyer, which is an absurd statement. I mean, they prosecuted Flynn for lying, and he had no lawyer, and what Comey admitted was an ambush. So it's an absurd rationale. And what we need to look at in this is it's a pattern.
What you just said makes no sense compared to, like, you can't blame a shitty lawyer if someone doesn't have a lawyer. And so the argument would be the shitty lawyer gave you bad advice that heavily prejudiced your position in a way that it wouldn't otherwise be the case. Where in the Flynn case, you don't have a lawyer. That is explicitly not a factor there.
I won't even argue this point, right? I won't argue the point. I think that ambushing someone without a lawyer is probably more of a reason to not charge them for small things rather than talking to someone who picked a lawyer they chose. Nonetheless, it's not germane, not important to what I'm saying, right? Like, so it's evident that, like, they had two choices. So again, I just want to be clear, because we're moving on, it seems, from the point of, I read the definition in the statute of corruptly. It seems to easily fit the definition that's provided for how they define the word corruptly, right? What is
other
obvious.
Evidence you have? All you have is that he knowingly. So all you have, right? So let's just be clear. At the time the charging decision is being considered, you just have the agents thinking that he was the one who deleted it, with some strong circumstantial evidence that Cheryl Mills had previously told him to delete it. So you have all that working around. What other evidence do you have of the corrupt intent that you need?
Real quick. So you're acknowledging now, in hindsight, we know there was corrupt intent.
No.
Right. That's right, you're not. So let's once more, but because that's the important part of this, right? Because you're saying that even knowing what we know now, had he not been given immunity, he shouldn't have been charged.
Even knowing what we know now, I think that the overriding concern of expedience to get to Hillary Clinton is absolutely a concern that the Department of Justice should take into account.
That's not the question that's not the question I asked.
What's your question? Even in hindsight,
knowing exactly what Combetta did, if he didn't have immunity, would you charge him?
I think on balance, in terms of the obstruction charges, with everything you have, you could make a successful prosecution, but I don't think that it's a slam dunk.
Okay, now real quick, I just have to pick a bone here, just stylistically.
Beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard, and so what's the problem here, Rob?
I just have to say, so then basically 90% of what we've been talking about, when I ask you point blank, like, well, knowing what you know now, would you say, you're like, yeah, probably, there's probably enough there to charge him?
Well, he definitely lied, right? Or at least, and from what we know now, a strong case can be made that he lied, given that he confessed that he was the one who actually deleted the subpoenaed evidence. But we're not talking about that.
Was he charged with lying to the FBI?
No, he wasn't charged with any. No one was charged with anything, even though many of them lied.
He had letter immunity.
Okay.
Yeah, letter I believe for the previous interviews. It was any kind of new lies.
That is true. That is absolutely right. So he had received immunity because they heavily suspected him of lying the first two times they interviewed him, and they thought they had enough to charge him for that lying. But they, instead of charging with that and then saying, because think about this, both of you, be honest, they had to know that it was this guy that deleted them, right? They had to know.
No, wait. The question, though, isn't whether it's he that deleted him. No, it's not even that, right? The question would be, did somebody give him an order to do it, right? Or
yes.
But then the question would be, so here's the question, and this is why when you talk about like Papadopoulos or Trump, it feels like for those guys, and I could be wrong because I don't know the ins and outs of all of this, for those guys, getting subpoenas and tracking communications and all of that was a lot easier because these were live investigations of what we thought were currently occurring crimes. Whereas for the email shit, that shit had already done and happened. You could subpoena out the ass. You might never get a communication in the future that proves something from the past. So isn't it likely that if he had gotten an order or something like that, if you really wanted to find that out, that you'd have to say, like, listen, bro, we're going to give you immunity. Tell us what the fuck you lied about so that we can go from there and check it. Otherwise, that investigation is just it's dead in the water, no?
But again, I don't know. Pisco, maybe you could be honest and answer
hold on. I'm asking you. I'm saying, let's pretend you're the investigator, okay?
Right.
So if I'm looking at somebody like Flynn or Papadopoulos or Roger Stone, right? These are live investigations. I can go to a judge. I can say, here's a warrant. We're going to tap their phone and shit, and we're going to fucking find out what these motherfuckers are up to, right? That's one way we can investigate. And this is maybe why these guys don't get immunity. I'm investigating right now. I see what you do right now, motherfucker. But let's say that we look at somebody like this Paul dude, okay? Now, Paul, this guy, all the emails are gone. I think this guy deleted them. Fuck, is he? Did Hillary give the order? Do we know? Well, how do I investigate that? I could try to subpoena and look for past communications, but they already wiped the fucking email server. Who knows what else is wiped? So I've got two options here. I can either try to like subpoena out and investigate all the people around and figure that out, start asking a ton of questions and everything. And if Hillary did order people,
which they did, by the way, just
or two, for more directly, I could just go to the guy that I know did the fucked up shit, and I go, listen, bro, we're investigating this shit. We know you fucked around. Tell us everything you know, including anything you fucking lied about, and tell us who the fuck told you to do this shit. We want everything you've got, and we need this ASAP. Isn't that a reasonable way to investigate that? Wouldn't that be like a reasonable?
All right, so you asked me.
It's totally unreasonable, right, Rob? I mean, that would be totally unreasonable and corrupt. That prosecutorial decision to go for immunity instead of charging them with a crime, not only is that something not a reasonable investigator would do, it's also evidence of corruption.
Right, given it plattered with what we see with the rest of the FBI in these investigations. Because let me explain to you how this would work, Destiny. Like, let's take a different situation, something that's more common. Like, we find a drug dealer and we want to know who's supplying them, right? That's something that happens quite often. So I say, we'll give you immunity from your crimes if you tell us who ordered this, if you tell us who your supplier is. What you don't say is you walk in and go, okay, here's immunity. Now, do you want to tell us who supplies you? And you'd say, no. I did it all myself.
Wait, no, hold on, wait. You're assuming that he's still lying. What if is it conceivable? Let's say that you find a drug dealer and you're like, okay, we're going to go to you. Listen, we know you're dealing drugs. We're going to give you immunity. You tell us who the fuck you're buying from. So you give him the thing of immunity, you bring him in, and he's like, well, here's the thing. I make the drugs myself. Sorry. Well, in that case, oh, fuck, then you're fucked. But couldn't that happen in an investigation? Oh, fuck, we gave him immunity. He told us the answer. That's the truth. And now, fuck, we don't have anything.
It could theoretically happen, but I think what wouldn't happen is giving everyone immunity, right? Before they had any sort of like lawyer talking to them, like they'll give you the goods.
Isn't
the
that,
way
hold
that
on,
these,
wait, and I'm
please,
asking,
you have to let me finish your point here, because I'm kind of debating both
well, no, I'm just
people
asking
here.
Questions. I just want to get to the heart of it, because my question is, you're saying they should get the information before they give the immunity, but why would that ever happen?
This is how this stuff would normally work. A lawyer who's representing the person would say, listen, my client is willing to tell you, like, where the information about who ordered them to do this, who did, right? Because the client's basically going to say, well, I'm innocent, or I'm not as guilty because someone else committed a more severe crime. I was ordered to do this, etc. That's traditionally how this would work. So it wouldn't just be a situation where they come in and they say, well, we're stumped. We know you deleted this. We know you committed a crime, but we're going to give you immunity. Just totally blind. And then you say, okay, here's the immunity. And that person says, well, here's the thing. I did it all myself. No one ordered it. Me, low-level guy, who literally talked to Cheryl Mills on the phone 2 days before I deleted it, who literally had Reddit posts telling people that that I was being told to do certain things with these emails.
That's nothing evidence.
Sure it is. It speaks to his mindset. It speaks to the fact that... Let me finish. It speaks to the fact when it comes to decisions that he was doing with these emails that he was being told to do those by higher level people. It's not bullshit.
Wait, so then here's the question on that, and this would be a kill shot for Rob. What is the evidence that he was being told by higher level people?
There's a meeting with Samuelson, with Kendall and Mills 2 days before the deletion happens. But there's a meeting that occurred. They know that a meeting occurred 2 days before the deletion on, I believe, March 28th of 2015.
Was that like an out of the ordinary meeting, or do they know that the deletion
of
the
emails were discussed? It's their tech guys. And Rob wants to say it's obviously evidence of corruption. I mean, this goes to show you, and there's contemporaneous evidence that Mills told, on March 9th, I believe, told him to comply with the subpoena. Maybe you say that's self-serving, but like you don't have a smoking gun showing that there's any corrupt intent whatsoever. Rob's going to point to this Reddit post in 2014 to show that it evinces an intent to obstruct a subpoena that didn't even exist at the time.
So wait, real quick. So you say on March 9th, Mills directly told him to comply with the subpoena?
I believe so. Cheryl Mills reminds obligation to preserve emails on March 9, 2015. Am I wrong about that?
So then your previous excuse that you offered, which was And the excuse that the FBI seems to accept, and this is what Comey said, this was the FBI's, the reason that he wasn't charged, they didn't say, well, we didn't know at the time and we regret giving him immunity. That's not what they said. They said the reason he wasn't charged is because he had an oh shit moment, right? Because this is what happened. He was told to delete this stuff in December by Cheryl Mills, and then once the subpoena occurred 2 weeks later, he's driving to work or something, he goes, oh shit! 3 months ago, I was supposed to delete this stuff, so I'm going to delete it, even though I know it's been subpoenaed, right? But now you're saying, well, wait a minute. On March 9th, far after that December, he said, Cheryl Mills looked at him and said, look, there's a subpoena now. You have to comply with it. So all of a sudden, the excuse of, well, he thought that he was ordered to delete it, that is a contradiction.
There is no contradiction.
Explain to me how that doesn't prove that he was no longer under the misapprehension that he was ordered to delete this by Cheryl Mills.
So, on March 9th, if Cheryl Mills sends you that you have an obligation to preserve documents for the House of Representatives, that doesn't mean that he became aware of the fact that he had failed to comply with the December 11, 2014 order or whatever the post-December order was. And so I don't know why you think that...
Pisco, come on. Like, this is what's so frustrating. Like, you can't admit this. I mean, this is so obvious. You can't admit that, right? Like, just think this through. You're told by your boss, hey, delete this stuff. 3 months later, you forget. And even though you know that a legal entity, law enforcement is now subpoenaing it, you still decide to delete it. And your excuse is, oh, because I was told to do it 3 months ago. But then what you leave out is, yeah, but the same woman who told you to do that 3 months ago just told you last week, hey, make sure you save all that stuff now. You can't even admit, like, yeah, you're right. If that happened, then he wasn't under the misapprehension. You're like, well, just because he was told to keep the stuff doesn't mean he wasn't thinking.
You're not understanding. That speaks to the lawyer's intent. That speaks to the lawyer's knowledge and what the lawyers were aware of and whether the lawyers were obstructing the proceedings or destroying evidence. We all know after the fact that he deletes evidence when he's made aware of the subpoena. We know that he is aware of the subpoena. We know that he's aware that, or he's likely aware that the evidence is ordered under the subpoena. And so this is the March 9th email speaks to Cheryl Mills' knowledge and whether or not that she was secretly behind the scenes pulling the puppet strings.
Pisco, what you said just made, it's not responding to what I said. When we're talking
what do
about...
you mean? How am I not responding?
Because, right, I don't know how I could make this simpler, right? The excuse for Combetta that was given by the FBI was that he knew that this stuff was subpoenaed, he knew that he was supposed to preserve it, but he remembered that in December he was told, you should delete this stuff, and so he had an oh shit moment, and just serendipitously, 2 weeks after a subpoena and 2 days after he met with Cheryl Mills, was like, oh shit, I gotta delete that stuff now, even though I know it's subpoenaed, right? And so that's the excuse. Well, he thought that he was ordered to do this by Cheryl Mills, but after that, right, months after that, once the subpoena occurs, Cheryl Mills directly talks to him and says, listen, don't delete it. Save stuff.
No, he still deleted it. We already know that Combetta deletes content after subpoena occurs, and that we know that Combetta is aware of a subpoena. The March 9th email from Cheryl Mills confirms to us that he indeed was aware of a subpoena, right? No one is denying that Combetta is aware of a subpoena, or at least aware of the preservation order that existed on March 3rd. And so at the very least, Combetta is aware of an obligation to preserve these records. I think any reasonable person could say at least from March 9th, right? At the very least.
Sure.
Right? Okay. That is not the same question as did Combetta remember the directive given to him in December of 2014 and how it relates to the order, the subpoena or preservation order. Do you see how those are two different things?
No, because it's literally the same person, right? When you get new information from your boss, the newer information is what would take precedent, especially when we're talking about deleting subpoenaed evidence, which everyone knows is a crime, right? So if he can't make the excuse, well, I was told in December by Cheryl Mills to delete this stuff, that's why I did it, even though I knew it was subpoenaed, because he was then told March 9th, according to the IG report and according to you, hey, make sure you preserve all of these records. So those two things don't jive. He can't say, I deleted them because Cheryl Mills told me in December, because then they would be like, but didn't she tell you in March not to?
Tell me if this is even logically possible. Is it logically possible at all for Combetta to have given the directive in December of 2014. Forget about that directive for 2 months. And then on March 9th of 2015, be saying, hey, Cheryl Mills, he says, preserve records. Yeah, no problem. I'll preserve them. Sure, yeah. Then March 30th, be like, oh, fuck. That is logically impossible?
Yes.
How is that
How is it
logically impossible?
We're saying there's like no possible world where this could
There's no
occur. It could
world
be
where that
unlikely,
could
but
happen?
it could occur, right?
Okay, it's beyond a reasonable doubt not possible. It is true.
On.
Like,
Wait,
for example,
in criminal, I'm sure you've spoken out against like Me Too stuff and shit. Like, that beyond a reasonable doubt, really?
yes. Let me reiterate, right?
Okay.
Because you have to. It's not just those two things in a vacuum. It is who Combetta was. He's constantly. Pisco already told you. He's the tech guy. He's constantly meeting with them. Constantly. So this is what you would have to believe. Like, imagine that this is your job, right? Your job's pretty fucking boring being the tech guy at Platte River 99.9% of the time. All of a sudden, you're thrust in the middle of, dude, you're the guy who has to hand over subpoenaed evidence in one of the biggest investigations politically in this country's history, right? You're in constant communication with the Hillary team, right? There is no way possible, given that we have actual evidence that he was told March 9th, you have to preserve this stuff, that he was like, oh shit, I forgot in December. So he remembered the December conversation, but not the March conversation, and not the conversations he was no doubt having every single day with Hillary's team, saying like, dude, you gotta hand this stuff over, or bury this stuff, or hide this stuff, or whatever they were saying to him, or preserve it, whatever they were saying. I'm meant to believe that he forgot what's going on every day in his life, constantly in communications about how serious this once-in-a-lifetime thing is, that he has to hand over this stuff because it's been
shut
subpoenaed.
up. You have
and
one meeting. What other communications do you have about this topic? You're saying constantly in communication about this topic. Just because you're a tech person doesn't mean that you're constantly in communication about the preservation request.
What do you think Cheryl Mills talked?
Excuse me.
What do you think Cheryl Mills was talking?
Excuse me. What other besides the Cheryl Mills meeting, which you don't know what the topic is, right? You have no idea what the topic is of that. Do you have any evidence that the topic of that conversation and meeting was anything to do with the preservation order or the deleted emails? Do you have any evidence of that?
I would say that given that this guy's sole job when it came into connections of Cheryl Mills was preserving or dealing with these records, that there's a pretty damn good chance that the meeting he had with her 2 days before he deleted... Again, I'm telling you, the evidence is, given that his job and his communications with Cheryl Mills previous to that had been almost in the realm exclusively of dealing with their tech. That's what he was doing at Platte River.
Email about preservation. What other communication do you have?
Again, like Pisco, like again, this is why you're. This is how we know that you're bad faith. Like it's constant. Why? It's constant bullshit. Because again, you already said before we were on this, when we were talking about low level, you said to Destiny, you were like, "Oh, well, he's the tech guy. He's in constant communication with them." Like that's what you said. We know that
stuff,
right? What other tech stuff? Right. So again, the argument. It doesn't.
I presume. I mean. You can have. Go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, it's one absurd argument after another. I'll just make this point quite clearly. We know at least that there was the one communication in March. That's enough. We know that he talked to them 2 days prior. I guess you're right. I don't, because he said, I don't remember. I guess we don't know why he was talking to Cheryl Mills. Maybe they were talking about their favorite coffee at Starbucks or something, and not about the fact that the big thing that was going on in the entire Clinton camp, let alone the tech guy that's responsible for preserving these, was the subpoena and handing this over. Maybe you're right. They decided
for a criminal conviction. You need evidence. You actually need evidence.
Maybe
that might be upsetting to you. That might be upsetting to you that it's possible that people can never communicate by email and have conversations and have total plausible deniability of criminal acts all the time. That might bother you. That there could be people, maybe even politicians, who could have plausible deniability and not disclose the nature of their communications. That could bother you. But guess what? In America, you need evidence to charge to convict someone of a crime. And I don't understand how you could possibly say that this was a absolutely clear-cut case at the moment the charging decision was being made, after everything you read in the Inspector General's report, talking about the murkiness of the factual circumstances, talking about the murkiness of the intent provision, especially with relates to corrupt intent and knowledge of the actual nature of the preservation order. And what else do you have? What else do you have?
I understand you're deflecting from this point. You're moving on to other things because you're getting crushed on. You're getting crushed on. The point is that his excuse that I did this because I remembered something in December makes no sense, given the fact that we know he was told by the same.
Why does it make no sense?
Well, if you'd stop interrupting me, I'll tell you, again, for the fourth time, makes no sense given that the same person that he said told him in December, told him in March to make sure to preserve this, and he had a meeting with that person 2 days prior to him deleting this. So the idea that he remembered a conversation from December, but forgot the conversation from a week or so prior that told him not to delete it is nonsense. It is nonsense, and the fact that you're so vehemently defending it proves that people should view with skepticism everything you say on these matters because you're unwilling to even concede the baseline.
There we go. Get it all
That's
out.
why I'm having this debate. That's why I'm having this debate.
The fact that someone disagrees with Rob, I mean, how many times I have to explain this to Rob? The nature of the conversation on March 9th is preserve the records. That's not the same as, oh, remember I gave you that order in December? It's totally possible that you remember.
I'm going to move on from this. I'm going to move on from this point because we're not getting anywhere on it. So let's talk about, so we've looked at the fact that Pisco even admits, given what we know now, they should have been charged. Now the only question is, should they have been given immunity?
I never fucking said that. What?
Yes,
I never
did.
said that.
You said, yeah, I can see.
No, the target's Hillary Clinton.
Again, I said, given what we know now, if he didn't have immunity, should be charged. And you're like, yeah, I could see them bringing charges. That's what you said.
That they could.
I thought it was whether or not he committed the crime.
No, I said
whether or not it was for lying or for, given what we know now, right? Which
right.
We wouldn't know. We wouldn't have a confession if he didn't have immunity. So you can't just be like, okay,
you're missing issues.
Hang on a second. You can't say imagine a world with no immunity and no fruits of that immunity, but we still have the fruits of the immunity. Like that doesn't make sense. If you're taking away the immunity, you have to take away the perfect knowledge of the confession. Doesn't that make sense?
Right, but we're talking about
okay.
But there's two separate arguments. Again, I assumed you were going to make the argument that Destiny made coming in, which the argument was going to be he got immunity, that's why he wasn't charged, should he had immunity or not. But instead you decided to go with this other argument.
That argument as well. I made both.
Right. So I get it. And that's where we're spending the majority of our time here. And what I'm saying is that argument's very bad. And you even admitted, okay, if we take away the immunity and we have a hypothetical world where we could just see this is the exact crime that was committed, not, well, we would have never known about the crime if we didn't have the immunity. That's not what I'm saying. Given that you know this crime, should it have been charged? And you said, yeah, they would have had evidence to charge it. That's what you said.
In a world of perfect information, where we know the nature of every relationship and communication that existed with Combetta, is there strong enough evidence to charge him for lying? Yeah. Is there strong enough evidence to charge him potentially even for the obstruction with perfect information? Yeah, it's possible. I'm just telling you.
So we got the perfect.
Hang on a second. Hey, hang on a second. I'm putting you in the decision making. The seat of the prosecutors at the time they're making the prosecutorial decisions. You can say, Pisco says that it's possible to bring these charges with perfect information. Yeah, it's totally possible. But that's not when we make charging decisions. We make charging decisions when we make them, and I'm presenting you evidence, and you're not accepting it on the murkiness. You're just flat out not addressing it, and you're just like, okay, I guess they said it, but I just have a better idea of the legal standards, of the factual predicates, and I'm just going to ignore what the agents had to say about the murkiness of the case. You have no response to it.
The murkiness of the case is part two. Because you've made this absurd argument, the first part, everything that we're talking about here has to do with the first part, that this wasn't a crime. It wasn't corruptly. It wasn't intent, etc., etc. Now what you're admitting,
to prove.
Please let me finish. Now you're admitting, again you admitted it. Yes, with the evidence we have now, with what we know now, there would have been evidence to charge. This isn't a question of when you say, but we're talking about what they knew at the time. That's a different question. That's on to part two. Should we have given them immunity to figure this out? We're on part one. Is this a crime? You vehemently arguing that no, it wasn't a crime because XYZ, blah, blah, blah. But then when pushed on it, if we know now, if we know it, you're like, yeah, I could see them charging it. And
Wait, hold on. I just want to clarify here on Pisco's side.
Yeah.
Because I'm hearing different things. So, do you think that he probably committed a crime?
In perfect information world, in the Rob world?
Yeah.
I think on balance, you're strong enough to bring.
No.
At least.
I'm not asking about bringing charges. I'm asking, do you think
that he lied to the FBI?
Lied to the FBI and probably acted improperly with the subpoena. For the lying to the FBI, that's for sure, because he admitted after immunity, right, that he had lied to the FBI.
But the FBI agents were saying that it was the lawyer's fault. I will grant you, on balance, I think sure. he said he didn't delete the evidence. He did delete the evidence, and so I think in perfect information world, you absolutely could get a conviction. And I think that he did not tell the
I'm
truth.
not even asking about getting a conviction. I'm just saying, do you think he did commit the crime? He did committed some crimes, right?
On
Probably?
balance, in perfect information world, lying to the FBI, I would say if I was on that jury, given perfect information, everything we know, I'd probably vote to convict. Yes.
Yeah.
What about the second part?
The
Okay,
second
with
part,
respect to
should
the
they have brought-
obstruction, the obstruction part, and this is perfect information world, obstruction related to deletion of subpoenaed evidence. In that world, given everything you know, without more specific evidence of corrupt intent, I think that one's more up in the air. I really do.
Okay.
I would say
don't.
obstruction of Congress. Hang on, obstruction of Congress. I would be voting to convict. But in terms of the other obstruction, the felony charges, Rob, the felony charges which require corrupt intent, I think that the standard for corruption, they have to show bad motive. And it's not enough just to show that he knew it was subpoenaed. That's what the case law tells us.
They don't. And I mean, even on this specific question, like you've gone back and forth, you've waffled, like given 3 answers on this specific question.
What have I waffled on?
And again, like you said, yeah, you think that he could have been charged. You could see the charges being brought. That's what you said first. Then the second time you said, just like 3 minutes ago, you were like, before Destiny chimed in, you were like, yeah, I could see them charging both lying and both, and now you're like, well, now I'm changing.
To be fair, hasn't there been, there's a slightly different question every time, because I think he'd still give a different answer. It's like, should they, given the information they knew
Answer
at the
no.
time, should they have charged him? Versus
Answer no.
imperfect
These
information,
are all different questions.
could he have been charged and convicted? It seems likely yes.
These are all different questions. Let's lay them out. One question is, should they have been charged? The answer for both lying and with respect to obstruction, I think for both of them is no, even in perfect information world. Hang on, can I finish? The other question would be, could a reasonable prosecutor bring the charges? The answer, I think, is yes, even before the immunity. It's just a difficult case. That's more evidence to go to the immunity part. And then another one is, if you were on the jury, would you vote to convict given these facts of perfect information? And I've told you which ones I would choose to convict on. I would choose to convict on obstruction of Congress, and I would choose to convict on lying to the FBI. And I think that the burden would be stronger, and they wouldn't have been met, based on what I know, for corrupt intent with respect to the obstruction charges. How am I waffling? Are any of those answers inconsistent with each other?
Well, here's how you're waffling because you just stated something that was never asked. Show me once asking, if you were on the jury, would you convict? Show me once saying, should we have charged given what we know? My question was the same all 3 times, was given what we know now, do you think that there was a crime committed that could have been charged? And you said yes, 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 yes. That's what you said until...
Just to be clear,
could have been
that
charged.
question-
So you just said could have been charged?
Could have
A crime
been
that
charged is different of like, should they have charged? Or, like, these are all kind
Would
of,
you
these are-
convict it? These are different questions, Rob. You can be mad.
But I didn't
and
ask
not
those
understand
different
what you're
questions.
asking.
I didn't ask
Okay, wait,
those
so
different questions.
let's
You gave
one
different
crystal
answers.
clear. Let's ask
What's your crystal clear question, Rob?
Ask one
I'm not
crystal
answering.
clear question, yeah.
Given what we know now, do you think that it was a crime to delete the evidence in the way that he did?
You can't just say that. What statute? The obstruction? Yes.
Okay, there.
Sorry. The obstruction of Congress? Yes. The Title 18 charges which require corruption? No. Lying to the FBI? Yes.
Okay.
So I just want to be clear. That's fine. So if we just have a hypothetical, I know we're not talking about the Trump raid and things like that. I just want to be clear. If it turns out that there was stuff deleted that was subpoenaed from the National Records Archive or any other organization, and it was deleted after those subpoenas were sent, right? You'll say, well, unless we have proof of corruptly, then you would say that's fine. We shouldn't bring charges.
Duh. That's what the statute requires. You befuddled by that?
Right, and what you'll say is, you'll say, well, corruptly is defined very loosely, and in this term, I think it's corruptly. I read the definition from the statute of corruptly. I'll read again, just one last time to get on this.
You can't just read statutes and think you know the law. There's case law.
But that's what you're doing.
Precedent.
That's what you're doing. You came in with the statutes. That's what you did. You came in. So what you did is you're like, well, you have to know the specific. Please. You were like, you have to know the specific statutes. Okay, we're going on. Then when I read more deeply and read the definitions held within the statute, you're like, well, that's not enough. That's not good.
Okay, it is necessary to consult a statute to know, or some kind of common law offense, if there is no statute, right? At least with respect to what we're talking about now, the federal crimes, assuming there's no federal common law crimes, you need to consult a statute. Agreed or disagreed?
Sure.
Okay. When you're interpreting a statute, even a definition section, courts interpret the word, right? Isn't it? John Marshall says it is emphatically the providence.
Wait, hold on. I know where we're going with this. Okay, but The thing is, if you think that he's interpreting something incorrectly, I think the onus is then on you without it
Right.
being an appeal
The
to
word
authority.
corrupt is surplusage, right? It means something, and it means there's a reason why these crimes
Sure, but
are
we can't just say that,
felonies
like, well, it's
as
a hard
opposed-
word to define. You would have to give some sort of case law. If you're saying case law is what you'd look
Right.
towards, or some, then you'd have to say, like, well, this is how it's been used in the past, right?
I posted it in our combination. We have
Okay.
a private chat.
So,
where
we'll check it later. But you're saying that there is case law where someone has intentionally deleted subpoena evidence was subpoenaed, they intentionally deleted it, and they weren't charged because that intention.
There is case law that says that it's not just intentionality that you need. You need also corrupt intent. You need both things. Two things.
So I've argued.
You think I'm lying?
No, I think that it's bullshit. I think that clearly that everyone that with half a brain knows that if this is the Trump team that did this, that the FBI would have brought charges. It's
Is that what we're talking about?
But
We're
anyways,
talking about what the statute requires.
Right.
Nice
I get it. I
deflection, Rob.
understand.
Nice deflection, Rob.
No, I understand. What you've already said. Yes, it should be charged, and no, it shouldn't be charged back for. But I understand that, and as I predicted at the outset, this will constantly be the excuse. So there will always be, just like the IG says. For those that don't know, what the IG is doing, because he can't find intent of corruption because it's almost impossible. It's an impossible barrier. All he does is look at any specific stance that happened. Giving immunity Combetta. Is there a world where theoretically you could give immunity to someone? Yeah. Okay. So then that's all the IG looks at. It's like, okay, as long as it's within the guidelines to give immunity. And the IG even outlines, he's like, we're not saying this was right. We're just saying, unless we have that 100% proof that this was corrupt, that the intent was to help one side or the other, and it operated within the bounds of what the FBI can do, then it was okay. And that's what Pisco's always going to say every single time, and this is what the FBI will do.
So this is another potential kill shot. I'm just looking to help you guys sync each other, okay? So then the question is, Rob, do you think you can point to a similar case under Trump's administration, where you're like, if that was fucking Hillary, I bet they would have given that motherfucker a plea deal. It's unreal that they didn't try to go further here or work out something. Do you think there's anybody in Trump's administration? And I'm sorry, I know that this is sprawling or this is creeping on this conversation a lot, but I'm just curious if you can find like one. Like think before you answer. Think of like your best case where you're like, at least these one or two guys, absolutely, if it was Hillary's administration, would have gotten more favorable treatment.
Right, like Manafort. Like for at least some of the crimes of Manafort.
Wait, Paul Manafort?
Correct. Let me explain. At least some of the crimes.
He was the one that was accused of like doing improper things in Ukraine, where they found like him doing like millions of dollars between him and Yanukovych and shit, where they found that ledger and everything, right?
The ledger was never proven true. That was actually election interference by a guy by the name of Lyshenko, who was a politician in Ukraine, who admitted in a Financial Times article in August of 2016 that they were interfering in the election because they thought Trump would be anti-Ukrainian when it came to Crimea. The ledger was never... Was it proven?
What are we talking about? I mean,
was the ledger proven? It's a question Destiny asked. It's not like I'm bringing it up.
I'm just curious. It seemed like they had a pretty big case.
But here's the point.
He was convicted on 8 counts of stuff, right?
But here's what I'm talking about specifically with Manafort. So Manafort was charged with failing to register as a foreign lobbyist. And the action, that was one of the crimes he was charged with. And those actions occurred, I believe, in 2013 while Hillary Clinton was still Secretary of State. And what was alleged was that he was lobbying on behalf of Yanukovych, who was the president of Ukraine at the time, who was considered a pro-Russian president. Right? And so the allegation was way back in 2013, before Trump ran for office, he was engaged in lobbying. Now, Mueller's indictment shows that he worked with 2 groups. One group was Mercury LLC, which is a Republican lobbying firm. The other group was the Podesta Group, which was the group founded by Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. So they committed the same crime at the same time with the same people. Manafort gets charged with that crime. The Podesta Group is allowed to retroactively file paperwork, and no one in the Podesta Group is charged with the crime.
You're telling me that the Podesta Group had the same crimes that Manafort was convicted on, all the tax fraud and everything.
No, not that. Just the FARA violation.
Yeah, it's like a multi-count complaint, which I haven't read up on because we're here to discuss the deletion of subpoenaed evidence. But there's multiple counts here. There's conspiracy to launder money.
Yeah, my understanding is Manafort got nailed to the dude on a lot, nailed to the wall on a lot.
He got charged with a lot of things, but that is an apples to apple comparison. One of the crimes that he was
convicted. Yeah.
Right, that one of the things he was charged and convicted for, his accomplice was the organization founded by Hillary Clinton's campaign manager.
The question's about immunity.
Right, so the point I'm trying
to be fair, I was broad with my question. I was just curious if there were examples of Like, will you feel like somebody in the Trump campaign was treated really unfairly when it came to some sort of discretion in terms of charging or whatever? But okay,
right, and so we get right. And do you disagree, Pisco?
I think there's no world in which the government was going to offer Manafort immunity based on your rationale that you just gave, which doesn't even touch on the litany.
But it's not just a question.
Like a 14 count complaint or a 12 count complaint.
The question is, would they have went after him for those other things? I don't think so.
Super random question, and maybe we can say this is too far back. It doesn't even relate to any of this. It's just couldn't you argue that I don't know the history of this, but didn't Bill Clinton get caught off some dumb shit? Wasn't that like a really sprawling investigation that ended up getting him caught with Monica Lewinsky?
It was Whitewater, right? I believe it was the Whitewater investigation.
In terms of like discretionary stuff, wouldn't that be an example of a Democrat getting super fucked because an investigation sprawled really hard and then something that wasn't even part of the original thing like ended up basically entailing like Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton like fucking around? Like, wouldn't that be an example of like, well, here's a Democrat getting completely fucked by a sprawling investigation system? Yeah.
But it wasn't the FBI; it was Ken Starr that went after him, right? Like, so the FBI ended up. Real quick, am I wrong,
bro? I mean, that's DOJ. So is your problem only with the FBI, not broader DOJ?
No, my problem.
Hold on, wait. I have a question for both of you now because I might be a retard. Does the DOJ actually have their own investigators? I thought that the FBI and like other intelligence work.
They're all part of the DOJ.
Yeah, okay. So there's not like I work for the DOJ, I'm going out and doing investigations. Don't you have like FBI agents will do stuff and then they submit that?
They work together. They work together on this stuff. You know, they
was
talk
Ken
to each
Starr
other.
the Department of Justice?
He's independent counsel.
Right, so he wasn't Department of Justice, right?
What do you mean? He's
right, so he was independent. It was the equivalent of Mueller, right? It's close
it's
to
actually
an exact
different. There's actually more.
But it's closer to than being in the DOJ, like you claimed. Nonetheless, Destiny, the point is this, right?
Sorry, that was okay. I'm just curious.
I'm not saying that the FBI's never targeted a Democrat. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying Chuck Schumer told us in 2016 that the FBI was going to find six.
Stop. I mean, this is not a freewheeling.
I mean, for God's sakes, I don't understand this. The moderator asked us a question going back to 1996, and I can't delineate. I can't delineate when I'm talking about the corruption, right? Like, I guess. Do you want to have a little sidebar with Destiny? Do you want to have a little sidebar with Destiny and ask what I'm allowed to talk about?
I can do the speech. Chuck Schumer said that they're going to fuck you over 5 ways by Sunday.
Yep.
The speech is the speech he gives every single stream, and you just give him an invitation
because it's irrefutable. Right. And here's why. Because it exhibits a pattern of the FBI when it came to starting in 2015, 2016, a pattern from the FBI going as easy as possible, giving people in the Hillary camp immunity, and going as hard as possible from the people connected to Trump. And it's not just that we had Schumer saying that. For example, this very IG report, in all of the times that the IG says, I can't prove bias, the one time that he delineates is he says, and it's because he's very uneasy with the fact that Strzok prioritized Crossfire Hurricane over the Hillary investigation, wanting to wrap up the Hillary investigation. He can't prove that wasn't bias. That's the only time that he uses that language. Right? Because he talks at great length, the IG talks at great length about the bias that was exhibited by high levels of the FBI. And we can see it with ourselves when all you have to do is look at Comey, McCabe, Rosenstein, Page, Weissman. You look at all of them, it's evident.
You're wasting your breath, Rob.
I'm not wasting my breath. What it shows is a pattern. But what it shows is a pattern. Again, what Pisco wants to do is look at every specific situation in a vacuum. That's what he wants to do. He doesn't want to look at a pattern. Right. He doesn't want to look at a pattern because the pattern would show, okay, maybe if one of these decisions were made, you would say, okay, that's defensible. But when you see it happening over and over again on one side as light as possible, and then on the other side over and over and over, including charging people for crimes.
You do things one at a time. That might hurt you that we do things one at a time because you want to just get into the narrative and you want to get into your flow. But we're doing this one at a time. And today we decided
you were going to do the Hillary Clinton thing. Well, because you guys aren't arguing on the facts right now. That's not what the argument is.
No, we are.
No, you're not. That's not what Rob cares about.
You don't care about.
I do care about the fact. I do care about the fact, but I was addressing what Destiny said.
Well,
right?
Here's what Rob. Here's what Rob's done. Is we have a constellation of like different things and decisions, and all of it paints a picture of like a thing. But when you get into like the individual facts, Rob wants to appeal to the narrative and doesn't care about the facts. It seems to me that in the case of this Paul Combetta dude or whatever, with the Hillary Clinton shit, it seems entirely plausible that the immunity deal would have been offered here. And I think any reasonable person would say, like, yeah, of course, this makes sense. But for Rob can't agree with that because there's a narrative. And that's what
not true. That's not true that I'm saying any reasonable person, right? I'm saying the narrative and the bias and stuff could say whether or not that was makes it more likely or less likely. But I could look at the specific facts of this in a vacuum and say, no, it doesn't make sense that the idea
in a vacuum, how does it not make sense though? It seems like
okay, so we haven't even got to that point because Pisco's arguing the absurd point that deleting the subpoenaed evidence. Well, he thought that in December that's why he did it, even though he was told in March not to delete it.
So that's all. You can come later on and say we have perfect information world, and you can present me hypotheticals where I'm on a jury and I'm choosing to convict or not. But you have to analyze if you're going to say that the FBI is corrupt. You have to have the information they have at the time, yes or no. So
can you give me 30 seconds to try to re-explain this?
You've been talking. You've been doing your speech for the last.
You are not getting the point. Here's what's going to happen, right? I could successfully argue, even to you, hypothetically, you would never admit that the FBI did anything wrong, but I could successfully argue even to you that, yeah, you're right, this was a bad idea to give them immunity, and you will still fall back to, but it wasn't a crime anyways. That's what you fall. So the first branch that we're crossing is whether or not this was a crime. So every time I hammer down on how absurd it is to say that, oh, well, he thought in December, so he ignored what he was told in March, you say, but what did please let me finish. Please let me finish. Every time I say it, you say, but what did the FBI know at the time? Right, that's question number 2. I'm more than willing to move on to question number 2. Let's do it. Let's move. Thank you.
Wait. Hang on. So this is where we are. Summary. Question number 1. Perfect information world. I would convict, and no immunity deal, right? That's the world that he wants to present. And we have the information from the immunity deal. Would you vote to convict? Do you think a crime was committed with respect to lying? I say yes. A crime with respect to obstruction of Congress? I say yes. A crime with the other Title 18 obstruction charges? I say no. That has been answered. Correct, Rob?
That's your opinion. You're wrong.
Okay. But okay. I mean, I'm convicting on 2. Pretty good.
I don't care. You're still wrong on the 3rd.
Okay, but do you think I'm bad faith for that? For what I just said? Is what I just said bad faith?
I think yes. I think that you're bad faith in the context of how this entire conversation has gone on because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what is argued here.
Can I hold that position in good faith? Can someone have that position in good faith? What I just said. I've read this thing about intent, about corrupt intent, and I think the evidence isn't there for corruption, but it is for intent to delete, and so it would meet the misdemeanor.
In a vacuum, an individual.
Okay.
In a vacuum, an individual could have that.
But can I just say what I think, and then you guys can go on? I'm sorry. I know it seems like okay. So this is what it feels like is happening, because especially what you just said, Rob. And I'm trying to phrase you as nicely as possible. Okay. Obviously, I disagree with your point of view, though, but this is what it seems like, okay? And this is the problem, is we're talking about discretion, which is hard, okay? And discretion can either go here or it can go here. And you guys are having an argument of a specific case. But every time Pisco says, it could be here, this is reasonable, and most people would say it would be reasonable, you're going, hold on, in a vacuum maybe. But when I back out and I look at the whole narrative.
He doesn't think in a vacuum it's reasonable. He does not think in a vacuum this is reasonable.
No. You said, hold on, he just said that in a vacuum it would be reasonable. But he's looking at a...
No, that's not what I said. I said that in a vacuum a person could believe that and not have it be bad faith. That doesn't mean it's reasonable.
Oh, okay. Wait, so do you think that if this was the only case that occurred and there was no pattern of corruption or whatever history by the FBI or anybody else, do you think that this could be a reasonable case if there wasn't the stuff with Rosenstein and Strzok?
No.
Oh, Jesus. Okay, then you're...
let me clarify. I do not, because we have 2 competing explanations, right? Can anyone come up with a third? Someone could give me a third if they have. We have 2 competing explanations. We know he deleted it. We know he knew it was subpoenaed. So the 2 reasons that he could have done it is, 1... he remembered serendipitously 2 weeks after the subpoena, oh shit, literally he says, oh shit, I was told in December to delete this stuff. Now I know it's subpoenaed, but I'm still going to go ahead and delete it. Even though I was told in March by the same person who told me to delete it, don't delete it, preserve the records. Or scenario 2, which is that either he was told or he decided upon himself, whatever, that he was going to delete this stuff. Now, which of those 2 seems more logical?
The roadblock you're running into, Rob, is the evidence of corruption, and that's no one's denying, right? And remember, this is perfect world, perfect information, no discretionary thing of the immunity deal going after Clinton. That's the scenario. Very limited utility in this aspect of the conversation. But just going on for a second, in that scenario, it's not enough to just knowingly delete subpoenaed evidence to fit those other statutes. It has to be corruptly. And reasonable minds, I think, can differ on the corruption element. I don't think reasonable minds can differ really on the other two with respect to in the perfect information world. But on this one, I don't think it's that out there to think like you haven't produced evidence that he knows that he's trying to like destroy evidence that's very highly incriminating, anything like that. Any communications being like, hey, that's bad stuff, or like, hey, we like anything to show that he was worried about culpability, that he had a bad motive.
It's again, the way you're interpreting corruptly, I've yet to see evidence in case law that would show that interpreting corruptly. I've read the definition of what corruptly is, and let me explain how, given what you're saying, how it would be impossible to, it could almost be impossible, other than someone literally sending an email saying, I'm doing this to get us out of this investigation, to charge anyone with deleting subpoenaed evidence, because all you would have to do, what Pisco's telling you if you're out there is, if you get in this situation where evidence is subpoenaed from you, you could delete that evidence, and you could tell them, the reason I deleted that evidence is I thought my wife would be pissed at me if that evidence came to light, and that would be fair enough. That would be fair enough.
That's not a fair.
What do you mean?
Not a fair construction of
exactly. Real quick. If Paul Combetta said the reason I deleted this stuff because my wife said if I find out that Hillary had work emails there, right, I'm gonna be pissed at you because you didn't say something to Cheryl Mills earlier. So that's why I deleted them. I didn't want my wife to be pissed at me. You would say that's fair enough. Then that proves it wasn't corruptly.
Of course.
Why not? What's the difference?
You want me to explain it?
Yes.
I'll explain it to you. So
I'm listening, but I'm going to be in the other room. I promise I'm listening.
The fact that you have tangible evidence of the order being given in 2014, by all accounts, witness interviews, I believe they actually have the email of the order being given, gives this credibility. This is not just some Johnny-come-lately story or some self-serving statement. There is actually material evidence that shows an order was given before the issuance of a subpoena. Okay? That doesn't exist in your pure wife hypothetical. If you add that element, that's just one thing to put on the list. Another thing is there's no like contradictory necessary evidence that like he was aware of what was on the emails, that he was aware that it was going to be bad for Hillary Clinton if any of this got out, or bad for himself. The fact that he's a custodian for someone else and not just deleting massive amounts of data for his own culpability, I think makes that an argument that it's at the very least highly plausible. And again, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to show that it was corrupt. It's not.
But again, you don't delineate. So your delineation here is, right? Your delineation is, well, I don't think that the example I gave about the wife thing would be an example. But how could, so you would say, what you're admitting by default, saying that would imply is that just because there's another plausible explanation doesn't mean that it wouldn't be corrupt.
It has to be credible. There has to be.
Right. That's exactly my point. And it's not credible.
There's corroborating evidence in the form of witness interviews and the form of the emails. Okay, you can shake your head.
It doesn't matter. I'm not denying that those exist. Okay. It doesn't speak to the issue at hand, which is, does the explanation make sense? No. So you've conceded. I've got you to concede that, yeah, it has to be something that's plausible. It can't just be someone saying, well,
of course.
Let me ask. Hold on. Wait. Let's get like legal theory for the United States of America. The question is if you were telling this story in front of a jury, would this be a jury trial?
Yeah, it would be a jury.
So if you were telling this in front of a jury, the jury's instructed, right, that they have to convict on this. It's a criminal charge beyond a reasonable doubt.
A felony, right? Which is 5 to 20 years in prison.
So felony charge beyond a reasonable doubt. So the question is would it be impossible that a jury would hear that story? My wife told me to do this. I fucked up, and I can prove I was given the order before the subpoena, and I drove back and I deleted, right? And the jury is instructed, and the defense is going to say this over and over and over again. Remember, you cannot convict unless you know beyond a reasonable doubt my client acted in a certain way. And the prosecution has no evidence proving that. They can say like, well, it's most likely.
There's an inference.
There's an inference. Yeah.
Yeah.
But is that a case where you'd be like, absolute easy conviction? 10 out of 10 times, of course. It seems like that could be a hard case. It could be a really hard case.
It's not hard. You're telling me, both of you are telling me, if you're on a jury, right, and a tech guy who understands subpoenas, knows that there's a subpoena, he's the sole guy that's responsible for handing these
on a jury, I'll tell you that especially after all the Rittenhouse thing and everything, I wouldn't.
You can repeat
because I don't think it's a beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't think it's beyond a reasonable doubt.
I disagree with both of you.
Wait. You keep repeating the elements that no one disputes on. No one disputes in the perfect information world, no immunity world.
Here we get Destiny. Do you see what he's doing here? Like, we're not saying that now you're going to say, but we wouldn't have known that if they didn't proffer the immunity deal. We're not talking about that. We're not. We're just saying, given that what we know now is that a crime. That's what this conversation is. And every time we
what we know now is it a crime. We already both agree that it would be crime. Of course, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about whether the immunity deal is okay. No,
that's what we're trying to move on to.
Rob, you yell at me for repeating the premise of this hypothetical when Destiny doesn't fucking understand it. Why don't you take a breath and chill, bro? I repeat it for a reason because this is complicated for Destiny. Just relax. So we're in the perfect hypothetical.
Hey! Why don't you take a breath too? You seem like you're getting antsy.
We haven't left that world, Destiny. We haven't left that world. And so the question is,
where we got all the information without the immunity deal?
No immunity deal. That's what we've been on we haven't been moved
but
past
when you say no immunity deal, do we get perfect information, even the stuff that they got from the immunity deal? We have all of that. Okay, well, I guess you've already said that you would convict on 2 of the 3 things then, right? Because the corrupt...
But not the thing that...
We're really just fighting on the third thing, the corrupt thing, on whether or not
Yeah, but he thinks
why not say fuck it? You got him on 2 or 3. Fuck it. Isn't that good enough? Can't we go to the second part then?
I'm ready to move on to the second part. I'm just saying, like, the whole question, like, I don't know how to make this clear. Like, the whole question of, well, if you were on a jury and this case was brought, that's another way of asking the same thing that we're asking, which is this, we now know, we're not talking about, do we know this because of immunity? We're just saying, okay, we now know the facts. And if the immunity was broken, right, say hypothetically, and so now this could be charged, and you were on a jury, would you vote to say, yeah, this explanation is bullshit? The idea that he knew that it was subpoenaed, he still deleted it, and his explanation was, well, because 3 months prior, I was told to delete stuff, even though the same woman told me then 2 weeks before I deleted it not to, but I had an oh shit moment, forgot the conversation I had with Cheryl Mills 2 weeks ago, but remembered the conversation I had with her 3 years ago.
That conversation wasn't about, I mean, you're just mischaracterizing the evidence. That conversation, there's no indication that was about, hey, remember that order. That March 9th communication from Cheryl Mills was about preserving records. It wasn't about the order to delete the emails that was given in 2014.
I would just ask this: would the prosecution even be allowed to imply that?
About what?
Would the prosecution be allowed to imply that meeting could have been about deleting?
Yeah, sure.
They would be allowed to
absolutely.
Imply? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it doesn't. We're not even talking about that meeting. We're saying March 9th. Like, this is basically what happened. Yeah. It might have been different language, but in fact, this is what happened. In December, Cheryl Mills says, okay, delete everything. We've given over all the evidence we have to, so delete everything that still exists that's older than 60 days. Is that a fair characterization, Pisco? In layman's terms? Yeah, in December
2014. Correct.
So December 2014, she's like, okay, we feel we've given everything over we're supposed to. Now you can delete everything that's older than 60 days. Fair enough, right? Then in March 9th, she's saying retain all the records because there's a subpoena.
Yeah. So Rob is inferring from that. It is unreasonable to think that when given the preservation, the existence of the preservation order, that it wouldn't immediately dawn to Combetta that, oh shit, in that moment, in March 9th, not on March 30th, that I fucked up and I didn't follow the order. He's saying it's unreasonable to think that you wouldn't think of that in the moment when the conversations are not necessarily, or the topics aren't necessarily.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying he's clearly aware that this is a big deal. He's been told by Cheryl Mills. He knows the subpoena's here. He's got to know. Let me ask both of you this. Would you say that a layman would think it's a crime to delete subpoenaed evidence?
With criminal intent.
We all know that, but it's just the question.
Okay, but
I don't know. Maybe my mind has been like super reversed. It's just that, like, is it beyond a reasonable doubt? Do I know beyond a reasonable doubt that he did that? There's no other plausible explanation. That's a high bar.
But listen, so a layman, so we're agreeing, right? We're all agreeing that Combetta would have been like, it's very dicey to delete subpoenaed evidence, right? At the least,
of course.
Okay,
yes, we all agree.
Okay,
yep.
So he's told in December delete stuff. He let's just assume he don't even know what the hell it is. He's just like, dude, I'm just following orders, but he forgot to delete it. Then he's told by the same person that told him to delete it in March, look, there was just a subpoena. This is a big deal. You need to preserve everything. And so then a week and a half later, he's sitting around and he's like, okay, I'm preserving all this stuff for the subpoena. I'm doing what Cheryl Mills. Oh shit! She told me in December, 3 months before that, to delete all this stuff. So now I will ignore what I've been working. Yes, that is absolutely implausible.
You don't think? I mean, this is the same guy you think is so is so like negligent and stupid that he would go on Reddit and ask for an IT for help from Reddit people. On the one hand, you say he's incompetent enough to do that, but he's not incompetent enough to like forget that someone told him something from his boss. I mean, are you really? Is that
Yes.
Is that your?
It's two different types of incompetence.
It's impossible for people to like forget what their boss told them to do.
So, for example, there could be incompetence, like I could have incompetence, for example, that I don't know how to do something, particularly on a spreadsheet in Excel. That's a type of incompetence, right? Versus I'm deleting subpoenaed evidence, which I know is wrong. I was told, and the reason for it is because I remembered a conversation in December, but forgot what I've been doing for the past 2 weeks.
Let me give you another story, Rob. Let me give you another story. You tell me if it's plausible.
Can we do one back and forth? You give this, and then Rob does the other one, because we've gone on this one thing for like I think a whole you guys do your thing and finally.
In December, my boss, a law partner, says, "Hey, Pisco, make sure we have to file the complaint in March, and I want to make sure that you're going to do the the certification, you're going to do notice, and you're going to do the summons." Okay. All right. Yeah. We'll file the complaint in March, whatever. March comes around and is like, all right, we got the complaint to file. And I'm like, okay, yeah, awesome. But I forget one of the items in that list of 3, or I forget all of them. I forget that I was specifically assigned to those tasks. And then like, okay, it's complaint time. It's time to file. Who's got the the notice and the summons and all that stuff? Oh shit. You think that could never happen? That's so implausible.
Right. If 2 days before that, your boss said, whatever you do, don't file that. Okay,
you don't know what that.
What do you mean we don't know? We're not talking about that conversation. We're talking about the March 9th order where she told him specifically preserve it. So again, the more apt comparison would be this. You're told in December, I want you to file these 3 things. Then you forget to file them. And then the deadline doesn't come yet, and your boss gets back into you and goes, Pisco, whatever you do, don't file that shit. It's very important. Don't file it. There could be legal ramifications if you file that. Don't do it. And you're like, okay. And then a week and a half later, you're like, oh shit, I forgot 4 months ago I told my boss I'd file that shit. But I completely forget that he just told me the other day that it would be huge ramifications if I did file it. Yeah, that's absurd.
Do you think here's some fuck? This is so crazy.
Let's move on to this.
I feel like there could be a lot of scenarios where it makes sense, a lot of scenarios where it doesn't. Where like you can see like a trail of like this, he does this behavior like multiple times. What if it was the case that over the past 5 years for managing emails, that same scenario had happened multiple times? There were like 6 other times where somebody was like, hey, like remember to delete this or whatever. It's like, oh shit, and then he remembers like a few months later, or that he does these in batches like quarterly or whatever. Like, could there be some information like that where that happens over and over and over and over again, and then he was told about some subpoenaed stuff and he's like, oh shit, I forgot to delete the shit again. And he just says like, would that make it more plausible if that pattern of behavior were there?
It theoretically could, but there's a difference that you were not looking at. The difference is the subpoena, right? And
I understand. I'm just saying that like there is some behavior that could, or like a behavior that would support you is, let's say that he had been involved in places that had gotten subpoenaed multiple times in the past, and the prosecution will say, when you got subpoenaed in the past over and over again, you actually marked this shit off immediately and you never touched it. Like, that would be a pattern of behavior that would support you. That if I saw that as your, I'd be like, oh, well, he treated subpoenas a certain way, and now it didn't seem like he did it here. That would be like a broken pattern of behavior, right? That's possible?
Right, but there's two, like, using your first example, if we just look at these 2 specific things as individual, right? So if we say, 1, take the subpoena out of it, take law enforcement out of it. We're just talking about your boss says delete stuff, and then you forget to delete it, and then... Your boss says, and months later they say, don't delete it.
Okay,
right? Right. So let's move on to...
101 because... Okay, we'll move on. We made our point. So now we're back into the real world. So we don't have perfect information when we make the charge decision, because of course we don't. And we don't have the benefit of the information we gather from immunity deals and not also have those immunity deals, because of course we don't have that information. And so now Rob is going to tell you why it's so clear that there's that all the murkiness talking about with the FBI with respect to the factual predicates and the corrupt intent. He's going to say why it's so clear to charge in that situation.
Right,
without the confession, without the third interview.
Right, because let's ask some questions first. Do you think, Pisco, that the FBI, even if they couldn't prove it, knew that Combetta was the one who deleted these?
Yeah, I think they thought that he deleted it.
Okay. Do you think at the time that immunity was proffered that they had enough evidence to charge him for lying?
I think that to charge him, certainly, yes.
Okay.
Charging is
then
probable
it
cause.
is evident that it would be easier to get information about what exactly happened with these emails. Because even if they weren't going after Combetta specifically, you would always prefer to prosecute crimes as opposed to allow those.
No, you wouldn't. No.
Yes, you would.
No, you wouldn't. I'm giving you reasons
Wait, let him
why
finish,
not.
let him finish that sentence. Let him finish that sentence real quick. Sorry.
You would prefer to, if you think it's a serious crime, such as one of deleting subpoenaed evidence and it's being lied about, you would prefer to prosecute that than not prosecute it.
Okay.
You can't make an end round around the merits discussion here, because one of the reasons why you might offer immunity with respect to a particular person is because you think it's a murky legal case. That might be one reason you offer immunity. That's one. So you can't get around what was their evidence of intent. And as you know, the Justice Manual, the Principles of Prosecution, you're not supposed to charge a crime unless you think that you can convict beyond a reasonable doubt. And so we don't have this standard where people are just, it's the practice of the DOJ or the FBI to just charge on probable cause, just to, put the screws on someone. At least that's not the practice of the Justice Department. And then finally, you're completely ignoring the point about impeachment. Even if it's the case that you're successful, the Justice Department could be making a totally rational calculus that we prefer to have this come in through immunity, because then you won't be impeached as harshly when it comes time to take the stand against the real target. And so all of those factors, the merits of the murkiness of the case, the impeachment aspect to it, and the real target being Hillary Clinton, those are all relevant and hitherto now unaddressed.
Okay, so one, you're wrong on your first point, because you've already mentioned that you thought that there was enough evidence to charge him with the crime of lying to the FBI, correct?
In perfect world, right? Or
no, not in perfect world.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I thought I heard conviction. So yeah, for charging, yeah, but we charge people who we have evidence to convict beyond a reasonable doubt, and that was a little harder, right? There was some feeling around that it might have been the lawyer's influence, that it wasn't going to be an easy and cut case. You don't have the confession, and so you keep trying to use what I said in the first segment were divorced from what was actually known by the FBI, and short circuit our analysis here, where they don't have that information.
All right, it's very wordy non-response there. So So you already conceded, right? The following: you conceded that they heavily suspected that he was the one that deleted this, and they had enough to charge him, right? And according to the IG report, I'll concede that there was at least one person it mentions that says they thought it was murky, but at least two of the agents said they thought that they easily had enough to bring a case for lying to the FBI. You've admitted that what we know now, which we don't know much more than we did at the time when it came to the previous two interviews that they had with him, that he in fact did lie, right? And so they said, well, we thought maybe his lawyer advised him to lie, but that doesn't matter. That's not a defense to that crime.
What do you mean it doesn't matter?
Well, it's not a defense to that crime, because again, we have to look at this, right? So here's why, right? Because if we're to believe this, they're like, okay, we need to find out who deleted. That's the big issue. Who deleted it and why did they delete it? That's the big issue. Now, they can't prove it, so they can't bring the case at this point that it was Combetta that deleted it. But they know that he did. They're almost certain he did. They just need the proof. And they can bring the charges that they can prove, which is that he lied. And so the way this normally works is you charge him with the lesser crime, right? And you say, okay, we're going to throw the book at you for this crime. We got you on this. Now, are you going to cooperate us? And maybe
Why
then...
is that the normal way?
Because that's
the normal way. I just talked a lot about impeachment. I talked about the merits, the murkiness.
We'll talk about impeachment. Okay. We'll talk about all that stuff, right? The other alternative would be to offer some sort of immunity deal. But if you have someone on a crime, right? You might give just a wholesale immunity with being totally clueless if you're literally, that's it. That's the last result, right? That might be a decision you make, but that's not what's going on here. They knew that he lied to the FBI. And so what they could have done is said, listen, we're going to charge you with these crimes. Now, we could offer you some sort of immunity or limited immunity if you could tell us who instructed you to delete this. We could do that.
That's exactly what happened. But
listen, they would have to, again, they would have to have some sort of agreement where they're talking to the lawyer, right? Where they would say, yes, we could give you someone else's name, right? But what you don't do is, yes, that's the way it works. You wouldn't say, well, we'll just give you immunity and then have to, that is exactly how it goes.
You could just be wrong. I mean, Destiny gave you a scenario that it could just be the case that he just did it himself, and you don't want to accept that. And he was being cooperative. He said, "Hey, just give me immunity. I will give you what you need. I'll give you all the information." There was willing, right? So
that's not how this. That is not. They would not do this in a world where there was already crimes that were committed that they could prove, right? They wouldn't do this. They wouldn't say, "Okay, we'll just give you blanket immunity," and then the guy says, "Okay,
blanket immunity."
It is blanket immunity for. Yes, it is. Yeah.
What kind is this? At most, it's use immunity. It is not transactional immunity.
Well, okay, I'll admit I don't know. When I say blanket immunity, I mean immunity for all the crimes that he committed related to this server.
Related to the server, no.
Or related to his. Yes, it was.
No. You can use all the info. You can still charge him.
No, you can't. You can't charge him for, and the immunity deal was anything that he admitted to there that he couldn't be charged for.
Isn't this use immunity? This is use immunity, which means we can't use this or derivative things from this interview. That doesn't mean we still can't charge you. That would be like transactional immunity. And so,
okay, well then, if that's the case, then they could still charge him with the leading subpoenaed evidence, correct?
There would be nothing stopping them from after.
Okay, so then right? There we go. So I win the debate, right? I win this portion of the debate, but let me explain why.
Why did you just win?
Would you allow me to finish? Because your argument was, given what they known when they gave him immunity, they didn't have enough to charge him. But you're admitting, well, they can still charge him with that after the immunity deal. That's what you're admitting.
They can't use what they got in the interview.
Okay, but they would be able to find out. So they can't use his confession, but now that they know, there would be a litany of other ways that they can find out that he was the one that was
either. It needs to be independent.
Oh, so then, right, exactly. So then we get back to my point that anything that he admitted there, they wouldn't be able to charge him for, because if he admitted, oh, and by the way, I did this for nefarious reasons, they couldn't go and look for derivative reasons to prove that he did that. Correct?
No, they could absolutely do independent stuff. It's just once you can't use what was in the interview and derive.
Pisco, you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways.
I'm literally describing the definition of this type of immunity, and you're saying you can't have it both ways.
Okay, here's how you're trying to have it both ways. So I'm saying, oh, so they still could have charged him with this, and you say, yeah, and I say, okay, so then they just couldn't use his confession. Fine. But they could have, now knowing the truth, found this information in other ways. They could have subpoenaed things. They could have looked at the transactional record of what he was doing on his computer, subpoenaed his computer, and found when he did all this stuff and charged him. And you say, no, they can't do that. That would be derivative of what he admitted.
But he cooperated, Rob. He cooperated.
It doesn't matter if he cooperated. He committed the crime.
But he's giving them this information on good faith to have a resolution of the matter, and you don't want to have a precedent of the DOJ like giving immunity and then reneging on it, being like,
it's not reneging. It's not reneging. You just said that.
What I'm telling you is, like, if they give him use immunity, right, and he just gives them garbage, right, just gives them total garbage, and just says random stuff and like, yeah, whatever. You can't game the system like that and just be like, okay, now I'm free. I'm scot-free for everything, right? No, that's not how that works. But if you're fully cooperating, right, that's what you want to incentivize. That's what you want to incentivize. And so I don't understand.
Well, hold on, let me phrase Rob's argument, because it sounds like this is what Rob's saying. Rob is saying that seems like that's what did happen. If we're to take the immunity argument, that basically they were like, okay, listen, we're going to give you immunity, okay, but you got to tell us, okay, you got to give us some good information. And he's like, okay, fine, let's do it. And they're like, okay, you've got immunity. And he's like, okay. I did it. Sorry, like, you should have just charged me because you fucked yourself, because I actually did everything, and I'm not giving you shit because I did it all. It sounds like that's what Rob's argument is, essentially.
Literally read the IG report. As soon as he explained everything, everyone was like, okay, now everything finally makes sense. At that point, it makes sense with Cheryl Mills' testimony. It makes sense with everyone who had given testimony up to that point with respect to the.
Well, wait, hold on. Can you explain this to me then? Because it sounds to me, based on what I've heard, it sounds like he didn't give them anything new at all. That maybe it kind of made a little bit more sense because he was like being more forthcoming. But like, if they would have, like, let's say they would have charged him. Let's say they renege on the immunity deal and they go before and after, right? The charges before and after would look exactly the same. They didn't get any new information from it at all. Or am I missing something there?
They got confirmation that no one ordered him to delete the emails.
So they confirmed that there was no new information.
They confirmed. Well, that's information, isn't it?
Well, kind of. So, like, let me ask you this question, okay? So, police come to my house, dead body upstairs, okay? 2 different guns are used to kill Molina. Okay, happens. Cops are in here, and now they bring me down to the station and they're grilling me, and they're like, okay, well, looks like you and somebody else killed Molina. We're gonna ask you questions, and they go through, they dig through the forensics. Maybe they find a bunch of fingerprints on the other gun, and like, okay, well, listen, dude, we're at a dead end. We're gonna let you plea this down or give you immunity. I know you never get immunity. People say we're giving you immunity, but you got to give us the other killer. You need to tell us what the fuck is going on. And you're like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And so they give you the immunity deal, and you're like, okay, that other gun, I took it with me to the range and some friends shot it, but I'm the only one that killed Molina. I used both of the guns. Sorry. And they're like, oh, fuck. Well, I guess we know why the fingerprints are on the gun, but yeah, we gave you immunity.
That would be
is that possible?
That would be a really bad use of immunity. I agree.
But that's Rob's argument. Rob's argument here is he's saying you gave immunity to this guy and you got nothing except for confirmation of what you already thought to be true.
But if it's the case, right, that you don't want to just charge this mook who is not the center and target of your investigation, if the crime itself doesn't rise to the level of like a murder or where thereby like this guy would be an essential target if he's doing these heinous acts. And if you want to incentivize people to come to the DOJ and cooperate as a general rule, then I think you should.
I feel like I reject this out of hand though, because now it almost feels like if I was going to commit any sort of crazy computer crime, I'm always going to let my lower dudes take the fall for it because there isn't even a real fall. I'll just have it like, bro, take immunity, say you did it on your own, and then boom, we're good.
Yep.
And then it seems like,
but no, but that's not what'll happen in the mine runner cases. You can there's other evidence that can discredit people. There's other evidence that can
yes, but in those cases,
contradict people.
In those cases where there's other evidence, though, you're not just offering blanket immunity. You've already got a charge on the table. If there was more evidence for this guy to show like corruption or whatever, you'd be like, okay, listen, bro, you either fucked here or you could take a deal and we could talk about this. But it's not like here's blanket immunity.
That's why it's relevant that the perception of the agents was that the case was murky. That's what, and it was at least equivocal. That's why it matters that their perception of the possible problems with impeachment evidence later at trial.
Yeah, and I understand the murky part. This is my only question, and I don't know how this looks in a courtroom, but like I just can't imagine an episode of like Law and Order or The Wire where somebody's like, okay, I'm going to give you immunity because it's kind of weird, and the guy's like, okay, thank you for giving me immunity. It was just me, and that's it. And they're like, ooh, shit. Like it feels like you'd work something like out that you'd work out something before that would happen. Otherwise, you got like fucked. That's what it would feel like.
Something like that literally happened in The Wire when one of the cops gets shot and the drug deal person comes in and makes a proffer. That's what that proffer was. Now, ultimately, they charge him, and in some cases, I think that you would charge people. But if the person is fully cooperating, they have reason to think that that person is lying when he comes with the cocaine, right? They have reason to think that I forget his name. Is it Savino? Savino. I think that's the guy's name.
Wait, I thought they caught. Oh fuck, I don't remember this exactly. But sorry, go ahead. But yeah, you can.
I think his name is Savino, and Savino, like, the lawyer ends up doing a proffer to admit to selling the cocaine or the fake cocaine, as it were, and he takes the charge for that. They think he's being untruthful, that that was all his intent was. But there are situations where immunity makes sense, and when you think it's like a murky case to happen, if you feel like the charging itself could be perceived as, we're just setting up a fall guy or something like that. I think that on balance, how can you say this is evidence of corruption?
Now listen, now imagine the other way. Let's say hypothetically, I'm not saying any of us could prove this, right? But let's say hypothetically that Cheryl Mills did tell him to delete this. Or Hillary Clinton told him to, right? So 2 days before they meet, Cheryl Mills and some other people in Clinton's team, right? Like, what are the chances where do you think the chances are better of finding that out? If you give Combetta immunity, and he says, okay, I did it all, and you're stuck there. You're like, well, that's it. Or if you say, we're going to charge you, and then put your, and let's not kid ourselves. Like, I hope you won't be dishonest about this, Pisco. It's not just the potential crime that you're looking at. When the FBI decides to charge you, the mere fact that you're being charged could ruin your life. You have to pay for counsel. You have to go through, your life's going to be on hold for however long it takes. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that, absolutely.
Right.
Wait, hold on, wait. I would say in general that's true. I don't know if that's the case for Hillary Clinton, though, no? Like,
well, no, I'm not saying Hillary. I'm saying you're Combetta. Right? I'm saying Combetta.
Okay, Combetta, sure. Okay,
so you're just some Joe Schmo. You're just some tech guy, and they're like, dude, we're about to ruin your life. We're about to charge you with this crime. You're going to have to get counsel. It's going to bankrupt you, and you're potentially going to be looking to lying to the FBI. You could potentially
They threatened him. Wait. They threatened him. They had a grand jury subpoena. He was going to testify in front of the grand jury.
Nonetheless, they didn't charge him with the crime.
He said he was
so
going
if they charge
to plead the fifth.
Okay, maybe he would have said that, but that's what anyone's going to say, right? If you say, listen, here's your options. Either one, we're going to give you immunity, or second, we'll charge you. I'd be like, yo, if you charge me, I'll plead the fifth. I won't say shit, but if you give me immunity, I'll sing like a bird. Okay, we'll give you immunity. What do you have to say? I did it all myself.
So
no one's in trouble.
You're trying to short circuit the murkiness of the case. You haven't mentioned the impeachment stuff at all.
What?
And the fact that they weren't confident in the charges. What about that don't you understand?
They were confident in the charges of lying, as you admitted.
They're not confident in the charge of obstruction. And
but listen,
hang on. What I admitted was that you could charge them, that there's certainly probable cause. But they're not saying that it's a done deal. They're saying that maybe we could do it, but that's not the bringing endorsement of confidence.
But again, the chances of getting to the bottom. If we're saying Cheryl Mills did this, right? Right, and let's say this guy has an affinity for Cheryl Mills in that she's an employer, or for whatever reason he doesn't want Cheryl Mills or Hillary to go down. He likes them, he works for them, whatever. What are the chances of finding out that information from Paul Combetta if he knows, basically, if I just say, no one told me, that's it, that's the end of it?
What are the odds of getting that information if... What are the odds of getting that information if you have to wait, I don't know. How long would you have to wait if it were a criminal prosecution?
So what? Why is the time matter?
And what if that's unsuccessful? I mean, I think the time is relevant in terms of getting... You think the time should not play a factor whatsoever?
I mean, the IG agrees with me. Do you want me to read what the IG said about it?
I think that prudence demands that if you're doing an investigation into the Secretary of State, don't you think, who's running for office, you don't think that should be taken into account at all in terms of the prosecutorial decisions?
No, not when... and the IG talks about this specifically in other ways, too. For example, they didn't take the devices of Mills and Abedin. And the IG says they found that very troubling, why they wouldn't do that. And one of the reasons they said was, well, it's because the State Department had this bad policy and a lot of people had emails, and it would have taken a lot of time to go through them. So you didn't look at her two key aides to see if they had classified information and everything, because their excuses, it would have taken time. Yes, if it means compromising the investigation and not looking at credible evidence or giving people immunity that committed crimes, yes,
I think they had no guarantee that he was going to talk. They had no guarantee that he was going to talk.
It doesn't matter if we're talking about what would there be a better chance of getting him to talk? Because again, tell me if I'm right or wrong. If we're looking at it, you said that the FBI said their goal was Hillary Clinton. Right? So they're going after her.
You agree with that, right? You agree with
that. If that's true, right? I don't agree. I think that their goal was to protect Hillary Clinton, but that's neither here nor there for this conversation. But if that's your thinking, you're like, okay, how do we get to the top dog? How do we get to the top dog? Right? If we give this guy immunity, is he going to admit that the top dog did something? Versus if we charge him with the crimes that we know that we could charge him with.
Never give it. So Rob, give us an instance of when you're given immunity. Give us one.
When a lawyer would come to you and say, if you give my client immunity, he'll be able to tell you who ordered him to do this, and it'll be able to convict other people higher up the chain.
So never give immunity unless there's an implication of someone else.
Okay, I'll give you another example. If you literally have nothing else that you could do, nothing. If you can't charge the person with a crime, if you can't turn the screws on him with the legal system, then you might say, we literally have nothing. That's clearly not the case here, though.
So you think these prosecutors are all talking out of their ass what they think is the prudent thing to do, and that everyone's like, he was willing to do it. This is the easiest path to do it. They're lying.
Well, it's not just lying, right? The IG agrees with me. The IG agrees that many people dozens of people in the FBI that were involved in this investigation made troubling decisions over and over again. The IG has a whole referral set. Would you say they were all lying then when they said, well, we did this for good reasons? No, you would say, yeah, they fucked up. They did things that were bad. Same thing I'm saying here. I think their bias impacted what they were. We know they had bias. I think bias at the top impacted, and you can hear it the whole way through. Like when you read the IG
for this bias that went all the way through. Do you think this came from the top down? Do you think this came from Comey himself?
Yes.
Why didn't Comey just quietly recommend no charges to the DOJ and then just step away from everything?
Because Comey admitted this in his book, right? So Comey wanted to...
Okay, well, let's not get into that, Destiny. This is the...
Oh, shit.
Okay.
Because there's top-down...
Regardless of the immunity...
Like you can't win at this.
Regardless of the immunity, at least give me this. Charging him with deleting subpoenaed evidence, that was murky. If you're going to charge him for something, you're charging him for lying, right?
Well,
You wouldn't. Would you charge him for deleting subpoenaed evidence?
Listen, let me be clear, right? Because I don't want to get confused again. At that time, even if they heavily suspected that he deleted subpoenaed evidence, it was murky that they didn't have the evidence at the time. I believe, given the evidence we have now, that he clearly should be charged for that crime. But that's the point, right? So they're like...
Wait, at the prosecutor decision, do you charge Combetta with obstruction for deletion of subpoenaed evidence? Yes or no?
When they gave him immunity at that time? That's what you're asking me?
Don't give them. Okay, in your world.
No, I'm saying it around the same. It doesn't have to be the same date, but I'm saying around the time when they gave immunity, knowing what the FBI knew then. No, they didn't.
Okay, don't give. Okay, so he shouldn't have been charged with deletion of subpoenaed evidence.
That's not true. That's not true. Again,
why?
Because. Listen to me. Because they were trying to find... They heavily suspected that he did it. They were lacking proof that he did it, but they heavily suspected. So the better thing to do would be to charge him for the crimes that you know you could charge him, such as lying. And then, once he lingers...
Deletion of subpoenaed evidence, right?
What's that?
But not deletion of subpoenaed evidence.
Well, they would have continued to... At that point, they would have subpoenaed his computer. They would have subpoenaed more records and tried to get the bottom of it. And they probably would have easily been able to find, after going... Probably painstakingly, I guess not easily, but when they went through his computer and stuff, would have been able to find the truth. That, yes, he was the one that deleted it. And this isn't difficult, right? Because there was almost no one else that could have deleted it. It was going to be the guy... Only a handful of people had the files, and it was like Mills and Pagliano, I think, and...
Combetta said other people could have deleted it.
Well,
Combetta said other people could have deleted it.
But it would have been a very difficult case. So that's why me, you, and Destiny and the FBI...
Why aren't you talking about the Reddit post? I noticed that...
You want to get... Oh, well, see, we didn't have to... So, right, we'll talk about the Reddit post. So what the Reddit post shows, as I was saying earlier, it goes to the factor of intent. It does two things. One, it shows... For those that don't know, do you mind if I just... For the audience, right?
Yeah, go for it.
July 23rd,
I'm listening. I have to...
Yeah, no problem. I trust you. All right, he's gone. Thank Christ. Now, July 23rd, 2014, there's a deal that's made between Hillary, the State Department, and the investigators to hand over all of her work-related emails. And so then there's a process of them going through it. The very next day, Paul Combetta is on Reddit under the name of Stone Tier, and he says a very VIP... people are telling me that a very VIP needs to have her name taken, or needs to have their email address taken off of emails. In other words, Hillary Clinton. So, and what this email or what this Reddit post suggests is he was told by someone. It wasn't a decision he made on its own, right? Pisco believes the explanation that Combetta gave, which was, I didn't want her email address to be made available to these investigators. That's Pisco's belief. That's what Combetta said. And the other explanation would be, the only other explanation I could think of, and I'm willing to have Destiny or Pisco tell me any other explanation they could think of, would be, well, that clearly the day after that agreement was offered, they were weighing options on how to obfuscate turning some of those emails over. That's clearly
clear, Rob. So my position was that Hillary Clinton's aides didn't want Hillary Clinton's emails to be released to the Republicans, to the public. You said that was so ridiculous that it shows on bad faith. Yes. That is your position now, isn't it?
Yes.
And part of that rationale is because her email was already released by WikiLeaks. So the public had access to it.
Part of it, but not an important part, but sure.
Okay. Which email address are you talking about?
Right, so you're going to say that Combetta's excuse, hr2clinton@email.com. I can preempt what you're going to say. It's still horseshit, but go ahead.
Okay, so hdr22@clinton@email.com.
Yeah,
that was what was leaked in WikiLeaks, correct?
Correct. Yes,
that was the email that she used during the course of her time as Secretary of State.
Correct.
Now, what is a non-stupid what do you think was happening to Hillary Clinton after that was leaked?
They changed her email address, so you're saying she was getting spam, probably?
I literally posted an article where news sites were pinging her and asking her questions, all sorts of you agree, right? That it's bad that you wouldn't want if you're a famous person to have your email leaked, right?
I wouldn't want my email leaked as a non-famous person, sure.
Okay, so what does a non-stupid person do? They change their email address, don't they?
Correct.
You think it's so unreasonable that Hillary Clinton wouldn't want hrod17 at clintonemail.com leaked to the public?
No, that's
you said
reasonable.
The Republicans are okay.
That's reasonable.
Yeah. So isn't it my position that she didn't want her email leaked to the public and to the Republicans?
That's not the part that's unreasonable.
What about what I'm saying is unreasonable?
The Republicans were investigators investigating a crime with subpoena power in Congress. The idea that she thought that they were unable to find her email addresses in other ways, or that it is a reasonable defense to say, I'm choosing to hide certain information because I think investigators will leak it to the public, is insane and stupid.
So you really think that it's unreasonable to suppose that on the 24th, after just having to change her email address to hrod17, they could be thinking...
How'd you get that address, by the way?
hrod17 at clintonemail.com?
Yeah, how'd you get that? Yeah, how'd you get that?
That's literally in... that's public reporting. I put... That's in the subpoena. Look at the subpoena. I linked the subpoena in our chat.
What's the subpoena from who? From Congress, the one that we're talking about, the one that lists 2 email addresses, the one where, the day before they issued that subpoena. You don't see how you're ruining your whole argument right here?
What do you mean?
So they already knew her email when they sent the subpoena.
Bro, they just found out about it. And then they subpoenaed that email. They actually got it wrong on their preservation. If you look at the preservation one, they spell the second email wrong. They issue a statement, which I linked in our sources, where they're like, we don't know what's going on with these 2 email addresses. I can read the statement from Communication Director on Clinton email addresses. Select Committee on Benghazi Communications Director James D. Ware issued the following statement regarding the use of multiple email addresses by former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The Select Committee on Benghazi is in possession of records with 2 separate and distinct email addresses used by former Secretary Clinton and dated during the time she was Secretary of State. Without access to the relevant electronic information and stored data on the server, which is reportedly registered to her home, there is no way the committee or anyone else can fully explain why the committee uncovered 2 email addresses. They were taken by surprise by it.
Right. Do you
Weren't
think...
they?
What? Well, it seems like that was the case, but here's the point, right? One, do you think that they, even if the email address was hidden, that they would have been incapable of finding it? And second, I'll leave you answer that first.
I'm saying in the moment where they're talking about masking the email address, because all of the previous email, right? The argument is, and this is borne out by the actual tech, when she changed her email address from HDR to HROD, it retroactively changed all the email addresses previously. You
then
would
how
be
did
like,
they get the? Look, if that's the case, how did they get the old email address?
Because it's on the state. An email has 2 people, a sender and a receiver. They have access to State Department records that shows what her old email address was.
Okay,
I
don't know that that's.
It's also leaked. I'm sorry. It's also leaked in the media. HDR 222 Clinton, as you admitted, and so you already. Your whole argument is that they knew about.
But that's not
HDR
what they said. Read that again.
email.
They said we have 2. Right. It's not that we heard about one in the public. They said from these documents we got 2 email addresses. That's what it says, right?
Bro. So
I mean, yes or no?
They knew about HDR22 at clintonemail.com, correct? That's what you said.
It was public knowledge. Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
So then, when they saw HROD, they were surprised.
Real quick, can you read that statement you just read again? Can you read it again?
Can you answer my question? You think
sure, they were surprised. Okay, I answered. Okay. Sure, they were surprised.
So
can you read that again?
You think I'm so bad faith? I'll read the statement and then I'm going to ask you. Select Committee on Benghazi. Hang on, I'll link it to you too. Select Committee on Benghazi Communication Director Jamal D. Ware issued the following statement regarding the use of multiple email addresses by former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The Select Committee on Benghazi is in possession of records with 2 separate and distinct email addresses.
That's good. That's all the further you need to read. So that doesn't say the only reason we're aware of our previous address is because we heard about it in the public. It says the documents we have both of the emails, right? So the idea that the tech would have changed all of her old email address to the new email address is nonsense.
No, they have records from other State Department officials. They have records from other people from the State Department who sent messages to her.
Okay, then Pisco, then how would have removing her address changed that? They would have had the receiver, and they would have still seen her email address.
She didn't change HDR22 to HROD until after it was leaked in response to the leak.
But that's listen, think about this, right? So just hear me out, right? So here's what we have. They agree to hand over all these documents. The next day, the tech guy's like, how do I take her address off of these? And you're like, the reason he wanted to do that, the reason he was told to do that, is because they didn't want Republicans to be able to see her new email address. Am I accurately?
In the public.
Well, okay. Nonetheless, we'll get to that point. We'll get to that.
The State Department, hang on. The State Department is doing FOIA stuff and fielding FOIA stuff as well for these records as well. And so it's not just the Republicans. It's who's going to see the FOIA request as well.
Okay. We'll get to all that. We'll get.
Hang on.
I know. Okay, go ahead.
You said I was so bad faith.
You are.
You are. To even think that the rationale was that she's trying to hide her new email address and from being spammed. Do you still think that based on that my explanation...
I understand you have to cut me off and I'm in my line of questioning, but yes, I still think that to get to the conclusion. Now, going on. So, now I have to restart. I have to re-get my train of thought again. So what? Yeah. So you're saying the reason was they didn't want her to see the new email address, correct?
Yeah.
And the reason that they would have thought that is because Outlook, when you change your email address on Outlook, then it what it does is it goes back retroactively and changes all of the email addresses you had before, right?
Yeah.
Then I say, well, then how did they get documents with both email addresses? And your answer is, well, because they have the receivers, right?
Of course. And it's public knowledge, as you said.
Okay. Last question. Given that, then wouldn't they have, under the new email address, even if it was blocked out, wouldn't they have been able to see it by the receivers?
No.
Why?
No, because she stopped being Secretary of State before she changed her email address. No one knew that.
Then how did they get these documents with her new email address if those emails weren't sent until after her tenure as Secretary of State?
She didn't mask the emails. She didn't do what
right.
Paul Combetta was unsuccessful. So they
got the
emails with a trot on them.
They didn't mask them, right? So the masking part's out of it, but then the underlying reasoning that Combetta gave for the masking that you're defending, which was, once I changed it, then all of the emails would be the new address, and we don't want them to find the new address. So he did change it, right? They changed the email address, right? Well, he didn't mask it, but he changed it.
Hang on a second. Do you think that like they shouldn't have changed the email address after?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I didn't remotely say. I'm saying. Go ahead.
They changed the email address in response to the leak. That retroactively applies HROD 17 to all the old emails. That text has been checked out. There's a fact check that will establish that, and they're all already changed, Rob. They're changed by virtue of the fact that she changed her email. And she does not want that email address, or her aides don't want that email address to be made public. Is that so unreasonable?
Yes, and let me explain why. Kids, you keep changing the question, right? We're talking about the reality of what this test got, if they would have masked the email. They didn't mask the emails, right? They didn't. They ended up not doing it, correct?
Yep.
But they did change the address, right? This isn't a trick question. Yes, they changed her email address.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So given that, if his explanation was correct, then they wouldn't have had the old address. They wouldn't have had documents with the old address.
They would.
Why?
They did. Sorry. The receiver's emails showed her email address.
So again, then had they masked her address on the sender's emails, they still would have had her new email address on the receiver's.
No.
So you're saying the masking...
Outlook does it in your server, right? Outlook does it in your server, but it doesn't mean the other people still have it doesn't go to other email addresses, to other emails and other servers or State Department servers, and it doesn't retroactively change them there. It's a private server.
So you're saying that the masking would have masked not just on the sending, but also on the receiver?
No. It would only have changed the emails on the server.
Okay, so then when I ask you and I say, well, how did they get emails with two names or with two addresses? You say, because the receivers. So that's people outside of the server, correct?
And public knowledge, both.
But we're not talking about...
The State Department has HDR 2.2, right? You agree with that? State Department has HDR 2.2, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. They give HDR 2.2 to the.
Pisco, can I ask you a question? I have public knowledge. Of what Hillary Clinton's email address is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that different? That I don't have any documents with that email address, though. Correct?
Yeah, you do.
I do. I've been sent emails. I'm not the State Department. I mean me, Rob Noor.
The state. Okay, you don't.
This is the problem. You keep saying public knowledge. They're not saying we know her old email address. They're saying we have documents with her old address and her new address.
They did have documents with her old address.
So then forget the public knowledge argument. That is irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the question of, yes, they may have known her email address because it was public knowledge, but that's irrelevant to them having physical documents.
They did. They had physical documents.
Right. So the public knowledge doesn't matter.
With her, the public, it matters in the fact that they knew it, right? But like, there's multiple ways that they know the email address. But if you want to be hyper literal to the words here, that yes, they have documents that show records that show both her new email address and her old email address. The new email address is from all of her emails that she handed over. The old one is from State Department records.
Right.
That's not.
But so in other words, she's sending these piles of emails over, right? Some of them have her old address, some have her new address, correct?
No, they all have her new one, right?
Okay, so they all have her new, but during those same documents were received by people with her old one, and so her old one shows up there.
The old one shows up for emails that are not on her server.
Right. So let's make it simple for me. Let's say she emailed you, right? So if her old address or her new address would show up on her server, but on you, when you get that, the copy would be her old one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if she was going to mask it, on her server, it would be masked. But what you get, when they get it from you, it would not be masked,
Wouldn't be
correct?
masked. No.
Right.
No.
Then you're conceding my point. That's exactly what I'm saying.
No.
Listen.
It shows how you can have...
Listen, let me explain. So if we masked it, and then that would keep Republicans from seeing this. But Republicans were also getting these emails from outside of the server, correct?
No, because new emails, all of her emails that they were getting, right, in July she didn't change her email address until the leak happened, which was after her time at the State Department. And so she wasn't sending the HDR22 email address. That was the one that was being used for her official duties. And so there shouldn't be any State Department records that have the HROD email address. And so
when did she change her email?
Her email is changed. Hang on, I have it. See, there's like 7 email addresses here that you should be aware of. A moment, I'll pull it up. So she started using her old email address, that's HDR22, in January of 2009 until the end of her tenure as Secretary of State. Then, at some point after that, in 2014, she starts using, in 2013, after the leak, she starts using her the HROD 17, and then in December of 2014, she changes to a whole new domain.
Okay, so she was still Secretary of State when she changed her address, 2013.
No.
She wasn't. So that was afterwards in 2013.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll look into it. Nonetheless, I will concede this, though. I will concede this. If what you just said is true, right, it would make sense that the received wouldn't have her email address, right?
Yeah.
Which is a misunderstanding of mine, so I will concede that point. Bo, if she sent any emails while she was Secretary of State with the new email, then clearly you would have to concede, well, then that throws their whole explanation as bogus, correct?
Unless they were unaware of that fact, but yes, I would say it wouldn't mask it if it, yeah.
Right. Nonetheless, so it's still, even having said that, right, that just speaks to...
Can you at least apologize to me?
No, because, again, it's only a small part of the issue, because the idea that her team thought... Because this is what you'd have to prove. One, that they think it's acceptable to hide relevant information from investigators because they're afraid investigators will leak it. Do you think that's ever acceptable for any other person that's being investigated to say, well, I altered some things I didn't want you to see because I was afraid you'd leak it?
They didn't do it.
But they talked about it.
Arguably, like, that's a hard situation. Like, the fact that they changed their email address, technically they already altered it by virtue of changing the email address, right? By virtue of changing the email address in the first instance. Yeah, they did. They altered it. They altered it used to say HDR, and now it says HROD.
At the time that the agreement was handed to handover, that's the time that they say, okay, you can no longer alter these.
How do you know?
Well, because just logically makes sense. If you're agreeing we're going to hand over all of these state documents, you don't alter them after that agreement is made.
I mean, is the problem having altered them in the first place? Isn't that a problem too? If she had altered it, if she had done this masking thing before there was an agreement, you'd be like, that's fine?
No. Well, wait. If she would have masked them beforehand, I don't see the problem with that. I don't see a problem with it. If there's for example, let's just take Bill Clinton's tenure, right? If we find out that might be before email was widely used. George Bush's tenure. If we find out that someone at the State Department in George Bush's tenure is like, I used some program to mask my email address, I don't see a big problem with it. They might say, hey, don't do that in the future, but I don't think that would be a crime. It would just be like, from now on, please keep the records intact. But
the idea to change the email address was like the ultimate proof of bad intent. Was the ultimate
way of
trying to hide stuff. But now it's like, okay, just as long as you don't have this little agreement, it's whatever.
Because it wouldn't be hiding stuff if no one's asking for the stuff. That's the proof, right? The idea that it was on the 23rd, they're like, okay, send this. If they were really
circling the drain.
I'm not circling the drain. Again, you're making it ridiculous. Let me ask you this. Do you think that Hillary Clinton would also have been worried that even without these records having to be handed over, that there was a chance that her stuff could get hacked or leaked and then her email address?
She's thinking about this. I think this is her advisors. If I'm being real with you, I don't think Hillary Clinton's worrying about this shit. It's her advisors who know, or maybe she did. I don't really know, but she just doesn't want to get spammed. It's some boomer who doesn't want to get spammed.
Okay. But then why? Then if that's the case, why wait until Then why wait until Congress asks for these records? Why not just use this program proactively?
What do you mean? What program?
If there are programs, if you're looking into the ability to remove your address, why not just you're doing record maintenance? Why not just do it proactively and say, well, we've already been hacked once before and our address got leaked, so we're going to remove our address, from older records to make sure that if they ever get hacked, we'll be all right.
Wait, they did change the address.
I mean removing the address. Right. Why not remove it?
But that wouldn't work with an active Outlook account. It was trying to remove it after you've already converted them
with the archives
into a digital image.
And it doesn't matter.
This is what they want.
So the 3 points on this. One, right? The idea that they would be that it's acceptable to say, oh, these things were requested, but I want to hide something from and you admit they wanted to hide this from investigators, correct?
I can spin this to be positive. They wanted to get the emails to look what they were, or maybe just remove them altogether. So it's not doing anything nefarious. It just maybe I wouldn't be okay with it after you come to the agreement. Maybe it's not best practice, but I don't think this shows some intent to hide or obstruct justice any more than just deleting requested
yes or no. Yes or no. Was there intent to hide something?
Yes, there was intent to hide.
So there was intent to hide the email address. So as someone who's in the law field, right, do you think that it is good practice? Would you view someone with suspicion if they were intentionally hiding things from investigators?
Not if they have a good reason for it, and the DOJ seemed to agree with that this was a good reason.
So the first argument, so that's point one, that she thought that their team, and it wasn't just Combetta, because he says in his Reddit post, remember, the day after they agree to hand this over, he's like, oh, we're trying to get her address off. So that's one. They thought it was a good idea. To believe this story, we have to believe they thought, oh, it's totally cool to remove her address and hide things from investigators. No one else would get away with that. Number two.
This is a real quick where we're winding this
wrap up.
Yeah.
Point number two, right? The idea that she was worried that Republicans would leak this, as if Republicans wouldn't be able to find her address in other ways if they wanted.
It's FOIA stuff too. It's they don't want the public to know, and that's just the rationale. And you can say it doesn't make sense, but your rationale makes absolutely no sense.
No, it absolutely makes. My rationale,
my explanation is not so absurd that I should be called bad faith just for having it. If it is true that it is true that there were two email addresses. It is true that one was leaked. It is true that she was being fucking spammed and pinged by all sorts of people. It is true that she changed the email address. Why wouldn't it make sense that she wants to hide it?
Because it's to investigators.
It's to the public. They're getting
No,
FOIA
it's
requests.
not. Like it doesn't matter. That's illegal as well. It's illegal to alter things so that they can't be retrieved in FOIA request.
Even if it's illegal, it's the rationale, isn't it?
Let me ask you this: if I request a document using FOIA,
Will you answer that?
What's that? Go ahead, ask
Even
again.
if it's illegal, it would be the rationale, right? Let's say I say, fine, it was illegal, but that's the rationale. You're saying, okay, if it's true, it's still bad. But before,
it's not
that
just
can't possibly be
it's
the
not
rationale.
just
And now you're
it's not just that. It is not the rationale. The rationale was that the rationale that matters is that it was intending to hide things that they didn't want. And it's clear that this explanation of, well, one, we thought it was okay, because it's not just, well, it's bad. It's they knew it was bad. Why would you take that step to incriminate yourself, admitting that you were trying? Right, but they're out there asking, right? Even that, they know what that's going to look like. Secondly, the idea, like getting to this point of FOIA real quick. If I file a FOIA request for Secretary of State Clinton stuff, doesn't that go through an agency that redacts things that I don't deserve to get?
Yeah, they could. Yeah.
Okay, so is it Hillary Clinton's decision to decide what to remove, or is it those people that do the redacting?
No. I think that she should have just given them over in the state that they were in. I don't disagree with you on that, Rob. I'm just saying, a day after they requested, after having had to change the email before, I don't think it's like a ridiculous explanation that it just beggars belief that she would not want that to be leaked out, and you think that that's so ridiculous it shows that I'm bad faith.
It is. It's so ridiculous. And it is a combination of things, the entire breadth of your positions on these things. But nonetheless, the idea, everyone watching knows what that's about. Everyone knows, right? Oh, Republicans are going to leak this stuff. And so she's going to alter it from investigators the day after this was asked. This is what was going on. And we know what the end result was, right? The end result was eventually they deleted emails that contained classified information, a bunch of other stuff that were work-related. That's what the end result was. So the idea that, it beggars belief that the reason that they would have been doing this was that they wanted to hide certain emails from investigators. That couldn't be that. Couldn't be that. Instead, the day after they reached this agreement, they were trying to remove her address. But trust us, it had nothing to do with trying to get investigators from seeing all these
removing her email
emails.
address, they were going through her emails. It wouldn't change anything. If you remove the email address, what does that change, Rob? It doesn't delete the emails. If you wanted to get rid of the information, you would just delete the emails, which is what they did. And so I don't know why you go through this song and dance of we do this masking thing to make it harder for them to search for, but it doesn't make it harder because we're going through everything anyway.
They didn't go through everything. They didn't go through everything. Did
Everything
they?
on the server.
No, they didn't.
No. But whatever they're getting, they're going through everything, right? And so
right. But what do they get? They're getting the stuff that's voluntarily handed over, but they're not getting everything on the server.
If you're gonna mess them up, if you're gonna delete stuff, you're not gonna send them an email. You're just gonna withhold sending them an email. You're not gonna do this masking thing and be like, we'll give you the email. We're just gonna mask it and hope that you don't see it. You're gonna review whatever you send them.
Two answers to that. One, in the immediate time. Right, in the immediate time, the day after, right, when you're batting around how to hide this stuff, you're probably going to come to a bunch of other conclusions. And second, your belief on this, your stance on this, proves their motivation for doing so. Because people like you and people at the FBI, etc., will say, it's not like they deleted them. So if you take the address off, and just so people understand, Pisco's argument's basically this. Well, they had the whole server. They were going to take the whole server anyways, so they'd be able to find all of our emails. Well, that's not true. When this was being done, they didn't have access to the whole server, and the server also contained Mills and Aberdeen's email addresses, which means that they weren't going through. So the way they were going through to see which ones they were going to look with, they went through a process, and part of that process was searching for Hillary's email address. That's how they went through. They didn't go through.
They were.
No, they weren't.
They were being given.
Right.
They were being given.
Right.
So why would you change the email and then give them that email?
They didn't.
And give them to them.
Well, they didn't.
They didn't. Oh no, but what would be the rationale for me to change the email address and then hand it over to you?
You wouldn't.
What you would? Yeah, you would just delete the email. You just not hand it over.
No, that's not true. Because if you delete it, then people would say, you deleted it, it's a crime. But if you just remove the address and then they later find it, you could have plausible deniability. You go, it's not like we deleted it. We just removed the address. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the world where they're less likely to find it. And if they do find it, you could say, just simple misunderstanding. Simple misunderstanding, plausible deniability. The idea that they did this...
It would be totally obvious that you're removing email address. You act like it's some surreptitious thing. It would be so obvious you're doing this.
Why? What if you didn't do it to all of them? What if you only did it to the 10 emails you didn't want them to have?
If anything, that shows an intent to hide. I don't know why you would do that and just not hand it over. And what's more, the more plausible explanation is a boomer didn't want her email to leak after it had already been leaked.
That's not plausible. It is not. The more plausible explanation by a long shot is it has nothing to do with coping, right? The more plausible explanation. And by the way, I bet that I find, I'm just guessing, and if I'm wrong, I'll put a video out announcing I'm wrong. I bet I find that there are emails that were handed to her handed over to them from her new address. I bet I find that after her tenure as Secretary of State.
Is there any situation under which you would apologize to me for what you said about how this belief evinces my bad faith? Is there any set of facts that could show you that evidence that shows that this is the correct, or at least a plausible rationale, where you would be like, okay, I was sorry, maybe I was wrong to say it was so.
No, not given in conjunction with everything that you've said on these issues prior. Like, for example, we didn't get into the FISA warrant, but there's clearly a pattern with you, just to briefly talk about it, where like it's like pulling teeth with you to get to admit even obvious corrupt things aren't corrupt. And then you say, well, yeah, it's a big deal, but you do this pattern that I see people on the left always do, like the BLM stuff. Right, where they'll say, it's mostly peaceful, I don't see much violence. And then when a right-winger does violence, they're like, oh, look, violence, January 6th, that's horrible. And I'm like, well, you were silent when it came to all this other stuff. And they go, I guess maybe they should have did more back there. That's what your take's been the whole time. I guess they should have fired more people at the FISA. Well, anyways, we're done with that now. Right. So the point it has nothing to do with going. I'm just saying that you have a history. If this was this one thing in a vacuum, would I called you bad faith? Probably not. But this is so stupid and so gullible to believe that the reason that this guy was on Reddit the day after trying to remove Hillary's email address was just merely because they weren't going to do anything. It was just merely because we didn't want her new address there. And
at least you were wrong before you said I'm stupid because it was the email was available to the public. You admit that was wrong. You were wrong about that when you said that in the debate we had.
Her new email was not available to the public.
Okay. All right. Okay. Can we just do closings and get out of here?
Yeah, go for it, dude.
Okay. I'll let Rob have the last word. Basically, I think that it's clear that based on like what evidence we have available to us, Hillary Clinton should not have been charged for deleting subpoena evidence. There's no evidence in the record whatsoever, as Rob often says, Hillary Clinton deleted subpoenaed evidence. There's no record of it. Rob admits he suspects that she's involved somehow, but he can't prove it, and so he should really shut up about Hillary Clinton deleted subpoenaed evidence. There's no evidence. He admits that there's no evidence that shows that she did that. He suspects it, but that's it. Same thing with the lawyers. There's contemporaneous evidence that shows that they had given an order. He doesn't deny that, and so the only open question is Combetta. And on this question of like immunity, I think it's definitely a plausible scenario that this is a murky set of facts with respect to obstruction. The evidence for corrupt intent isn't as strong as we think. At the moment you're making the decision, when you want to close this investigation before the election, when you have a target such as Hillary Clinton, and that's what you're going after, it makes total sense to offer immunity for someone who's willing to give the evidence. And Rob doesn't like the answer, but the answer was he did it on his own. And there's no indication whatsoever that Hillary Clinton was the mastermind of these efforts. If he was sure that there was, he'd say flatly that she should have been charged. But he knows there's not, and so he's going to say that they don't deserve to be charged. I will agree that like if you have perfect omniscience information, yeah, you could definitely get a conviction on lying to the FBI, and I'd probably be on that jury voting to convict for lying to the FBI. I'd probably be voting to convict on obstruction of Congress, but of course Congress needs to certify this matter to the DOJ, and they haven't. And I don't see Rob complaining about the House Republicans until now. I'm not sure when Rob discovered how many emails exactly Hillary Clinton had during this period, but I think it shows like a lack of interest in this matter. He's been complaining about it for like 5-6 years and like doesn't know this, or at least didn't know this basic fact about how many emails she had with respect to the masking incident we just talked about with Reddit. On the Reddit stuff, which of course is relevant because it speaks to the intent of Paul Combetta, marginally, it's a year before the subpoena is issued, or like close to a year before the subpoena is issued. It's the explanation given by the Hillary client makes total sense. She had the email leaked. She changed her email address. She didn't want that getting out. They didn't even mask it, and Rob's making a meal out of nothing. And so I think this is a big nothing burger, and it shows the desperate lengths that Rob will go to paint all of the people who disagree with him as bad faith, just for disagreeing on the merits of plausibility and stuff like that. So thanks for hearing that long-winded speech, and I appreciate DGG's indulgence.
Okay. Yeah. So to talk about the thing, so there was basically 3 parts to this. The part about Hillary's, the Combetta going to Reddit, it's self-evident that they were doing this the day afterwards because they were trying to hide things. I'm not going to go into what we just talked about it. Like, so the other 2 parts of it. One was the underlying crime of deleting subpoenaed evidence. A crime. Yes, it was. I think I was able to definitively prove that. It was a crime in at least 2 statutes, probably more. But there were 2 that were mentioned here. Pisco disagrees with me in the second, but agrees with me in the first. The idea of, was it appropriate to give immunity? It wasn't appropriate to give immunity for the reasons I said, because what ends up happening is if you're trying to get a bigger fish, you don't give someone immunity knowing that they could just say, okay, it was all me and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's the position they put themselves in. This fits a pattern that we see over and over with the FBI and their double standards that they had with the Trump investigation and the Hillary investigation. We could see that even the IG said here that he thought that there was probably bias, or he couldn't prove that there wasn't bias, which is stronger language than he ever used. When it came to prioritizing the investigation into Trump over this, we could see that they put this artificial time frame on it. We could see that there were all sorts of questionable decisions, such as they didn't raid and get the laptops that were the culling laptops that were used by Mills to delete all of this evidence. Instead, they offered into an immunity agreement with her as well. This is different than we would see with them do something like Trump, where they'll just raid his house, even though he's a former president. We could see that they gave all sorts of people immunity. It was the opposite of what they went after Trump, where they went after low-level people. They're admitting we didn't want to go after low-level people under Hillary. The underlying crime was there. She had classified evidence and government documents at her home. It was treated completely differently, not just by the FBI, but also by the Democrats, the political class, the media, than it's treated under Trump. It's considered a big deal under Trump. So these double standards are rife over and over and over again. And I understand that we're talking about one issue here, but what Pisco wants to do is look at things in a vacuum and say, well, it's plausible that this could have happened in this certain ways. But once you stack these things up over and over again, you can see that that plausibility goes out the window. On this specific issue, like, it is undoubtable, especially, like, Pisco makes mistakes all over the place. Like the idea that he says even after giving immunity, once they found out that he gave them nothing of value, they could still have prosecuted him. Okay, well, they chose not to. I think Pisco's wrong about that part of it because he doesn't understand the exact type of immunity. But if he's right, it's even more damaging for him because they should have then gone after him for doing this. The idea that we were going to give Combetta immunity and not go after the person that deleted subpoenaed evidence, you want to talk about setting a precedent, which is something Pisco said. The precedent is set now that if you delete subpoenaed evidence, that it's okay as long as you say, well, there was a standing order years back to delete. I'm sorry, the argument that Pisco's making makes no sense, that he had an oh shit moment and remembered his conversation with Mills in December, but forgot his conversation with her just a week or 2 prior, where he was told that he had to preserve this, and he knew that under a subpoena you had to preserve this. It just doesn't make sense. It's obvious that the FBI knew that explanation didn't make sense, but they allowed him to get away with it. They allowed it to wrap up in a nice, tidy bow. I significantly doubt that Combetta acted on his own. He probably was ordered to delete those, but we'll never know because the FBI never put any pressure on him. Instead, they offered immunity. The last thing I'll say is, I don't care what any of Destiny's fans think. I don't care what any of Pisco's fans think or anyone else. If you're honest with yourself, he would have the entire opposite opinion if this was Trump and not Hillary. The exact opposite. If we find out that there was deleted evidence subpoenaed under Trump, I guarantee Pisco will be everywhere going, oh man, that's terrible. He won't say, well, Trump didn't know. Let's just give the person immunity and see what they say. And the person says it was just me. Pisco would be furious with that, especially if it was done by FBI agents that were exhibiting bias towards Trump over and over again. You know what Pisco would say. You know what the Democrats would say. You know what almost every left-winger would say. And the reason that I say bad faith is because there aren't enough people on the right anymore that are calling these bullshit double standards out. People on the right want to play nice. Oh, yeah. I don't think Pisco's a bad guy. I don't. I wish him well. I'm glad that he passed the bar. I hope his career takes off. I do. I hope his streaming does well. But enough's enough, and we need to start calling out this bullshit of people that cheer for this double standard because they see it as defending their side right now. It's ridiculous. Corruption at the FBI is more important than anything Trump or Hillary or anyone other specific person was alleged to have done. And until we start calling out this obvious bad faith bullshit where people will defend all of this stuff when it's Hillary but want to go after Trump or anyone else, that meant Biden or whoever, want to go after Trump as hard as possible, it's just going to keep happening. So more people should call it out, and I'm glad that I did.
Wow, guys. It's been fun. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. I've had a long day today.
Yeah. Good night, bro.
Good luck, dude.
Take it easy.
See you later.
Yep.
Peace out.
Yeah. Later, bro.
Yeah, so I didn't think it was that close. I think that Pisco's just wrong. He tries to argue little points that don't really prove his point. Oh. It'd help if I turn my camera on, huh? Yeah, I mean, it was a little frustrating with Destiny interjecting. I don't think it was the worst, but it was a little frustrating. But I don't think it was that close. I don't think that he could defend those positions. I really don't. Thank you. I'm glad you think that I did very well on it. Yeah. I mean, it's frustrating because it's so evident. The double standard's so evident. Right? Now, the reason I did that debate was because what I wanted was Pisco to give a bunch of defense of that, because I almost guarantee that when we've learned more about the raid on Trump and classified evidence and things like that, we'll see if he's as generous. What has to be not just intent, but corruptly intent. We'll see. We'll see if he's that generous. That's why I took this debate. Because I knew the more I pressed, the more he would say things that we'll say, okay, we'll see. We'll see what happens when it's Trump. Thank you. Thank you. I thought that I did very well as well. You know, look, I do think that we need to start. I don't know that it sucks for me. I would sooner not. I'm the type of guy that you know, if I have a bad service at a restaurant, you know, I tip like 15%. And then I tell my wife, because I normally tip like 20 or 25%. I'm like, there, I showed them. My wife's like, Rob, they don't know that you normally tip better than that. They don't know that you've been like, aha. You know, they don't know that. But that's how I am. I'm not very confrontational when it comes to like just interactions in my real life. I like to be a people pleaser. I went to a wedding last weekend, or 2 weekends ago, where it was all my left-wing friends from college, and they're talking politics, and I'm just like, well, because I feel it's my responsibility to facilitate, like, it's okay. I'll find a bone where I could agree with you here and there, and then we'll just move on for the conversation. But I do think that people are too lax, particularly that are populists or on the right, of letting people get away with that shit. Oh, no, they wanted to remove her email address because they didn't want them to see her address. Oh, no, this guy forgot that about this conversation he had in December. And do you understand how stupid that sounds? I mean, imagine that. This is the one time that your job really matters. You're told there's a subpoena. You need to collect all this evidence and send it over. You're told by your boss, Cheryl Mills, that. And then she meets with you 2 days prior. We don't know. He forgot what they talked about. But there's a meeting. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I forget the conversation I just had with Cheryl Mills a week ago, but I remember the one I had with her 4 months ago, and I'm going to delete all this. It makes no sense. And that's what I'm talking about, bad faith, right? At least Destiny, I don't know what Destiny's position on that is, right? But Destiny from the get-go was just like, oh, immunity. It was worth having the immunity. That's a debate that, okay, that's a debate that you can at least have. If Pisco would have said something like, yeah, you're right, that's a bullshit excuse, but what could they do? He already had immunity. Fine. But that's not the stance he takes. He defends even that little stupidity. Well, theoretically that could happen. Bullshit. You know, and then when it comes to the immunity, isn't that... And like I said, the thing to remember is this. When you look at all these situations in a vacuum, this one particular situation, like the IG was doing, yes, the IG is going to say over and over again, well, technically, you could give people immunity so they didn't operate outside the scope. And I didn't have any smoking gun email that said, you know, we're giving this guy immunity because we want to help Hillary Clinton. And that's what Pisco's, he's always going to resort to. Well, it is plausible that you could believe that. It is plausible that you could do that. So, it's tough to, like, go into, like, debates. It's very frustrating because half the time Pisco's talking, I'm like, what the fuck? You know, he's just like making points that are not germane to what I'm talking about. But Neither here nor there. So I am going to head out, though. It's 1 a.m. I got work tomorrow. This is fun. You should see me again Wednesday. Wednesday, I'll be debating with left-winger Bastia against my friend Pedro from the Crucible and a guy named Ralph on Christian nationalism. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you like. And look, I've no doubt that probably a bunch of people in Destiny's crowd are like, Pisco crushed him. He didn't. He didn't look good. Right? He didn't. And even Destiny, when it came to the point of, wait a minute, so you could prosecute this guy even once he had immunity? Like, Pisco didn't know what to say there. So, all right. I'm not on YouTube, so I'm not going to bother rating anyone. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all Wednesday night. As always, have a good one.